Chapter 676 Glass Knife. Surrounded by devastation, Sunny, Kai, and Effie stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. Their weapons were still raised, ready to strike at the enemies, however. There were no enemies around. Just dead silence. Sunny tensely studied the devastated hall, then slowly pulled out the emerald amulet and looked at the little girl with a silent question written on his face. Effie, tell me, is there perhaps a slumbering saint somewhere in the temple? She frowned, then shook her head. Sunny was genuinely perplexed. Maybe there is an indescribable horror that had been contained by the chalice, and we have set it free? Or an ancient curse? The little girl wiped the sweat off her bruised face, then said in her soft, childish voice, "Not that I know of. No. There are no horrors or curses." Sunny blinked a couple of times. So, what we really won, just like that? Effie stared at him for a bit, and then yelped in outrage. What the hell do you mean by just like that? We just wiped out 100 vicious awakened battle zealots, and you yourself killed 3 ascended champions. Not to mention destroying the chalice, which was supposed to be indestructible. By the way, was that not hard enough for you, you crazy demon? He tilted his head a little and thought about it. Well, when you put it like that, I guess it was a bit hard. The 3 of them, especially Sunny, had indeed achieved something remarkable just now. But it still felt weird he didn't even lose a single limb, body part, or heart. Well, he did lose half of a horn. That had to count for something, probably. Sunny scowled. That victory had not been easy. In fact, it had been the opposite of that. However, it had not been as costly as he would have expected it to be. 3 ascended were no joke, let alone as fearsome as the war maidens had been. Granted, they had faced him after being mangled by the strike of thunder and the consequent explosion of the chalice, and he had only been able to damage the chalice, thus allowing the divine flame contained within to destroy it, because of his insight into how true sorcery worked. So, in a sense, this victory was the result of those months Sunny had spent barely surviving in the Red Colosseum, as well as his trials in the countless nightmares that gifted him his 3rd shadow. And more than a bit of luck. He sighed, then asked dubiously, "So, what? We can just go?" Effie looked around, her gaze lingering on the corpse of the white-haired maiden for a few seconds. Her little face turned somber, and then she simply shrugged. "Unless you want to get roasted even more by the divine flames, I suggest we do." Kai, who had been silent this whole time, looked around, as well. His gaze, however, seemed to be aimed at something beyond the walls of the devastated hall. Then he lowered his head, his eyes turning dark. The young man lingered for a few moments, and then said in a low, hoarse voice, Are there other children that were being trained in the sect? Do we need to take them with us?" Sunny froze, then scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. "Oh yes, I did not think about that. The war maidens were known to take in orphaned girls, right? Where are they?" He wasn't too happy about the prospect of taking care of a bunch of kids, especially since he had just slaughtered their previous caretakers. But the idea of leaving them here did not sit right with Sunny, whether or not they were just phantasms of the nightmare. Noctis would end up having to deal with settling the children in the sanctuary anyway. Effie's childish face slowly turned still, and she briefly glanced down, in the direction where Kai had been looking a few moments ago. She turned away and said in a strangely even tone, There were a few other girls with me before, indeed. But they didn't make it." She dismissed the dusk shard, then bent down to pick up one of the swords laying on the stones. The war maidens were not bad people. You see, at least not at the start of it all. But somewhere along the way, the sect changed. By the time the girl whose body I took over ended up with them, it was as though everyone here had gone insane. She walked to the next corpse, stared at it with strange darkness in her eyes, and then picked up another weapon. They were obsessed with the idea of creating a warrior capable of slaying someone called Solvane, so their training, what they called training anyway, had grown vicious, cruel, and inhumanly hard. Of all the girls subjected to it, only a handful survived. In this batch, I was the only one. Effie sighed, then stopped, staring once again at the body of the white-haired war maiden with a complicated expression. Strange, isn't it? It was not like they hated us. On the contrary, they seemed to care about their wards a great deal. Didn't stop them from killing us, though. She remained silent for a bit, and then added, and despite the fact those girls were being tormented and killed, it didn't stop them from loving their killers. Humans are very weird that way, huh? The little girl was silent for a few moments, then suddenly smiled. So, yeah, I would like to get out of this place very much. If there is nothing else, let's just go. Sunny hesitated, then silently motioned to Kai to come closer to Effie. She was putting on a brave face, but he could sense that beneath it, the huntress was deeply disturbed by what had happened to her in this temple and what they had done to the temple themselves. Then, he turned around and headed for what remained of the stone chalice. As he got closer, the heat of the divine flame grew almost unbearable. Sunny once again activated the enchantment of the memory of fire and the augmentation of the underworld armament, then moved carefully between the burning shards of stone. In the spot where the chalice had stood before, surrounded by a ring of flames, a simple knife made of a piece of ghostly glass lay, reflecting the furious white light of the fire. Because of the shape and position of the deep fractures that had spread through the cracked floor, it seemed as though the glass blade had been the epicenter of the terrible explosion. There was not a single blemish on its surface, though. Sunny lingered for a moment, then leaned forward and picked up the glass knife. It was light and cool to the touch, just how he remembered it. Just to make sure, Sunny glanced beneath the surface of the glass blade and froze for a moment, transfixed by the sight of a single string of fate encased within it, looping endlessly on itself. Even if he had not seen that knife in one of his nightmares, he would have instantly recognized it for what it was. The key to an immortal's death, the Ivory Lord's death. He had found it. Chapter 677. Current of Fate. Outside of the now empty temple of the chalice, the dawn was slowly painting the world in a beautiful shade of lilac. Sunny was sitting on the ground, staring at a scarlet odachi and a spear with a blade etched with runes that lay on the ground in front of him. Kai had dismissed his armor and was standing nearby, his wooden mask charred and blackened by the heat of the divine flames. His gaze was distant. Effie was also close. She was standing in front of a pile of weapons, some of them whole, some broken and melted by the fire. Despite her exhaustion and injuries, the little girl, whose body was almost entirely covered by bruises and lacerations, was picking up one weapon after another, then thrusting them into the rocky ground with somber determination. The graveyard of swords surrounding the temple was slowly growing, thanks to her efforts. Sunny observed Effie for a while, then sighed. He did not see a lot of sense in leaving so many enchanted weapons behind, even if most of them were only equivalent to awakened memories. However, he was also not going to stop the girl from performing the wasteful ritual as long as it gave her some closure or whatever it was she was seeking by performing the strange burial. It gave him food for thought, however. In the future, he knew there was no such graveyard around the ruined temple of the chalice, which meant that no one had done this last mercy for the war maidens slaughtered in the Great Hall. Was that the reason they had turned into vengeful wraiths, perhaps? Maybe. Or maybe the swords had just been stolen or destroyed at some point later in time. He had not seen the rest of the graveyard in the future as well, after all. So then, what exactly was the connection between the nightmares and the dream realm? Before, Sunny had been sure that nightmares were simply recreations of the past. Now, however, he was not so certain. After all, the Temple of the Chalice was destroyed in the same exact manner as it had been in the future, which meant that he had always been the one to destroy it. The seed of nightmare was a portal to the actual past. Sunny scowled, then shook his head. No, this didn't make any sense. If that was true, then too many things would have been changed in the waking world every time an awakened conquered their nightmare. The connection was too easy to spot. All he had to do was to go and carve his name into one of the menhirs of the sanctuary, then check if it had actually appeared outside the seed. People weren't fools, they would have known by now. Nightmares were almost certainly simply recreations of the past of the dream realm, and not the actual thing. However, the coincidence of how the Temple of the Chalice had ended up was too glaring to be natural. Logically, the appearance of Awakened from the waking world should have changed the course of events that had happened in the past completely. And yet, it had not, at least not yet. He could think of two explanations for that, one far less frightening than the other. The first explanation was that this was a simple case of his knowledge of the future informing his actions in the past. Sonny had thought of destroying the chalice because he had already seen it destroyed in the future, and so the cycle had been complete without any ominous reasons, just due to a logical connection. The second explanation was far more concerning, at least to Sonny. He knew more about fate than most people. He knew how hard it was to change it, let alone escape its stranglehold completely. So what if fate had a pull on all things, had influence over all of existence, and pushed everything, everywhere in a certain direction? To a certain conclusion, no less. If so, the details of what happened could potentially change, but the end would inevitably and inescapably be the same. That was a thought that terrified Sonny beyond belief. He had proclaimed fate to be his sworn enemy after all, and now that enemy seemed more fearsome than ever. With a grim expression, he glanced at Effie one more time, then rose from the ground and walked over to the pile of weapons, picking one of them up and thrusting it into the ground. The girl was breathing heavily, her little body seemingly on the verge of collapse. Nevertheless, she glanced at Sonny with a stubborn expression. "What are you doing?" Sonny picked up another sword and shrugged. "Helping. You must be hungry, are you not? The sooner we are done with this, the sooner you can eat. Everyone wins? No?" Effie hesitated for a bit, then turned away and nodded slowly. Together they continued to bury the swords of the maidens in the rocky soil, with Kai soon joining them. Before too long, the pile of weapons had disappeared, joining the countless swords surrounding the empty, silent temple. Sonny did not know if what they had done was going to change fate, even a little bit. But he hoped ardently that it would. The next morning, the inhabitants of the sanctuary saw a very peculiar thing. A man in a wooden mask and with skin that resembled tree bark effortlessly landed on the soft grass of the island, his tall figure covered by a fitting silk garment. A moment later, a towering four-armed demon climbed from beneath the island and joined him. However, that was not all. There was a scrawny girl of about 11 or 12 years of age sitting on the shoulders of the demon, holding his horns with her little hands and swinging her skinny legs wildly. "Giddy up faster." Listening to Effie laugh, Sonny gritted his teeth, then said with irritation, "Can you stop swinging your legs? I am not a horse, damn it." The huntress did not listen, so he grabbed her legs with two of his four hands and held them in place, which was not easy to do, considering the little girl's monstrous strength. "Ouch, my bruises." Effie made a pitiful face and whimpered. "Oh no, please don't hurt me, Uncle Demon. I'll be good, I promise. I'll try to recover from the beatings faster. You don't need to get angry." As the people stared at the girl's terribly bruised body with dark expressions, then looked at Sonny angrily, he hissed, "I didn't. She's not. You stop it right now, Effie. That is not funny." The little girl threw her head back and laughed again, then leaned down with a mischievous smile. "Yes, of course. Whatever you say, Uncle." After that, she glanced at the tall menhirs of the sanctuary and lingered for a few moments, then whispered quietly into his ear, "So let me get this straight. Everyone in this nightmare was driven insane by the demon of desire, and to conquer it, we need to set her free, with the help of a mad, transcendent sorcerer who wants to defy the gods, start a war against the other four chain lords, and kill them. And it was that guy, Noctis, who sent you to the Temple of the Chalice. He is the one we are here to see." Sonny looked forward with a dark expression on his bestial face, and then growled, "More or less, we have a thing or two to discuss with him." He paused for a moment before adding, murderous flames igniting in his eyes, "Because I am pretty sure that Noctis, that rotten bastard, has swindled me again." Chapter 678, Wind of Change. The three of them entered the sanctuary, crossed the beautiful garden, and entered the sorcerer's residence through a familiar wooden door, Effie still sitting on Sonny's shoulders with a curious expression on her childish face. The rooms within, however, had changed since the last time Sonny had seen them. The luxurious furniture was gone, as well as beautiful decorations covering the walls. Instead, all that met them was barren stone, with a few broken sailor dolls laying on it, their limbs disassembled and laid out around the bodies like macabre pieces of art. The floor of the whole central chamber was covered by a circle made out of a myriad of runes, powerful currents of soul essence flowing through it and dissipating into the ancient stones. Noctis was sitting in the center of the circle, his eyes closed. Without the familiar carefree smile, his beautiful face seemed ominous and strangely terrifying. Hearing their footsteps, the sorcerer slowly exhaled. The crushing flood of essence slowly thinned and then dissipated, retreating back into his body. He turned his head slightly and opened his eyes, which shone in the darkness for a moment, as though full of pale moonlight. Then, they slowly turned human again, and Noctis smiled, returning to his usual laid-back persona so suddenly that it seemed almost disturbing. "Ah, Sunless, my friend. You are back. Sit down, have a drink welcome." He stood up and outstretched a hand, as if trying to gesture at a set of comfortable seats. Then a surprised expression appeared on the Transcendent's face, and he looked around the empty hall with a bit of confusion. "Oh, right. I've been remodeling." Noctis sighed, then clapped his hands together. "Well, no matter, dolls. Bring my guests something to drink. They must be parched after their journey." His voice echoed around the residence, however. Nothing happened. He hesitated, then glanced at the broken mannequins lying on the floor and awkwardly shifted his feet. "Ah, how unfortunate." The sorcerer shook his head, then shrugged and looked at the three of them with a smile. "Anyway, welcome." He tilted his head and stared at Effie, then blinked a couple of times. "Ah, you have brought a Chi child with you. How curious. It doesn't bite, does it?" Sunny frowned, but before he could speak, Effie blurted with feigned outrage. "I am not a child. I am 12. Almost." Noctis stared at her with doubt. "It speaks. How bizarre." Sunny slowly inhaled, then said evenly, "This child is called Effie. She is the friend I have told you about." The sorcerer's polite smile remained glued to his face. He stared at Effie some more, then furtively glanced at Kai. "So, one of your friends is a cripple you randomly stumbled upon in my sanctuary, and the other one is a small child?" Sunny nodded grimly. Noctis rubbed his chin, and then cautiously said, "Sunless, are you utterly sure that you did not just invent having friends? To make me value our own beautiful friendship more, perhaps? If so, let me assure you, I value it a great deal already. There's no need for you to feel insecure just because you are not as beautiful, wealthy, wise, generous, and delightful to be around as me." Sunny gritted his teeth and then hissed furiously, "I am. Wait. I mean, I am sure that I did not invent them. Are you sure that you really want to know the truth about me and my friends?" Noctis raised his eyebrows with a sincere look on his face. "Well, of course." Sunny stared at him for a few moments and then said, "In that case, my friends and I are not actually a demon, a cripple, and a small child. We are humans from a distant future whose souls were sent here by a nearly almighty entity known as the Nightmare Spell, after the gods had died and this whole world had been destroyed. Oh, and this place, it is not real. You are not real too. All of it is just a complicated illusion created by the spell to test us three, no, us five, actually. That's the honest truth." The sorcerer looked at him with wide eyes. Then he sighed, shook his head, and uttered in a hurt tone, "Sunless, there's no need to weave such stupid lies to mock me. If you don't want to tell me, you don't have to." He pursed his lips and turned away. "So childish. I take it all went well then. Since you are in the company of a new friend, you must have successfully infiltrated the Temple of the Chalice, found her, retrieved the glass knife, and fled before the war maidens noticed." Sunny flinched, then cleared his throat and remained silent for a couple of seconds. Finally, he said in an even tone, Well, actually not exactly. We did retrieve Effie and the knife, but..." Noctis looked at him with surprise. "But what?" Sunny coughed. "We sort of destroyed the chalice and killed all the war maidens." The sorcerer stared at him in shock. "You did what?" Kai sighed, and then strained his vocal cords to speak. We were left with no other choice. The maidens were willing to give us a chance to earn the right to take the glass knife away, but they would have never let Effie go. That was a tenet of their sect, so the sect had to go instead. Noctis stared at them with wide eyes, his face turning deathly pale. He swayed a little and then yelped. "But what do you mean you killed all the maidens? How did you manage to kill them? What about their transcendent sect leader? Did you kill her too?" The three of them looked at each other with confusion. Then Effie cautiously spoke up. The Venerable Foremother, who was the last transcendent of the Red Sect, died like 200 years ago. There were no other transcendents among the maidens since." The sorcerer blinked a couple of times. "Wait, really? Huh? So she just went and died? How pedestrian." Sonny stared at him, aghast. Did that fool? Did he really forget that real people had a habit of dying from time to time, unlike his own immortal self? How insane could that charlatan really be? But then, he had to stop himself. No, that was not right. Noctis was no fool. He just enjoyed playing one. There was no chance that the immortal would not have known whether or not there were transcendents living in his territory. Which could only mean one thing. Sonny took a step forward and growled, "Do not insult us. You knew perfectly well that there were no transcendents in the Temple of the Chalice, and you also knew that you could have easily obliterated that whole place and taken the glass knife, if you wanted to. We three are formidable, as far as awakened go, but not nearly as formidable to be able to do something that a chain lord would not have been able to." He glared at the immortal and said, the emerald amulet almost cracking in his fist, "So Noctis, my friend, why don't you tell me the real reason for why you really sent me and Kai there instead of going yourself? And be very careful about what you say, because our beautiful friendship might depend on your answer." Noctis remained silent for a while, looking at him with an unreadable expression. Then he sighed and waved a hand. All right. If you want to be boring, I'll tell you the truth. No need to get angry." He clapped his hands again, and the disassembled sailor dolls suddenly rose from the floor, their limbs flying up and connecting to the wooden torsos. Then, one of them disappeared for a moment and returned with a silver goblet full of fragrant wine, presenting it to the sorcerer with frightened reverence. The others backed away and froze, standing silently near the walls. Noctis took the goblet, took a sip, and looked away with a somber expression on his exquisite face. "Yes, it is true that I could have retrieved the knife, saved your friend, and destroyed the Temple of the Chalice myself. That would not have been too hard with or without the Transcendent guarding it. However," he stared west, his eyes turning dark, "if I made such a move myself, the other four would have learned of it. Then, they would have understood why I made it and what I am going to do next as well. They will know my intentions eventually, of course, but now is not the time. Not yet. Revealing it all now would be troublesome." Sonny scowled, then briefly glanced at Kai. The archer was looking west, too, his shoulders tense. The Ivory City lay to the west. The Red Colosseum, too. He hesitated, and then said in a grim tone, "So you can't act openly out of the fear that the other chain lords will unite to attack you?" Noctis turned to him and smiled. "Fear? No, nothing that whimsical. It is simply a matter of convenience. You see, until—" Suddenly the sorcerer grew silent. His face turned grave, and his eyes shined with a glint of distant moonlight. This time, it was not a performance. Sonny could feel that something had really gone wrong, because the whole room inexplicably changed, becoming much darker, colder, and full of dire tension. Noctis slowly turned his head and whispered, his voice stunned and solemn, Something changed. No, it can't be." He looked toward the doors and then added with a grim expression, "We have another guest, I think. A messenger from the north." Chapter 679, Messenger from the North. The sorcerer seemed shaken. No, more than that, he seemed deeply troubled by something. Noctis stared at the door for a few moments, then frowned and said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "Let us go and see who is knocking on my door, then." With that, he drained his goblet, threw it aside, and walked toward the exit. Sonny, Effie and Kai glanced at each other, then followed along. No matter who it was that had come to the sanctuary, they were currently enjoying the sorcerer's hospitality, so the identity of the new arrival concerned them too. Who could have affected Noctis that much? Or was the change he had spoken about the real reason for this strange behavior, while the appearance of a guest just happened to coincide with it? They were going to find out soon. Together, the four of them, three awakened and an immortal saint, crossed the garden of the sanctuary and walked between the ancient menhirs to the field of grass beyond. There, an elegant figure waited for them, dressed in an austere black garment. It was a young woman none of them recognized. The young woman was tall and slender, with pale skin and lustrous raven-black hair that moved gently in the wind. Her face possessed an almost otherworldly beauty to it, its lines full of solemn grace and splendor. However, that lovely face was blemished by a stark flaw. Her eyes were covered by a simple strip of black cloth, the same color as the dress she wore. The contrast between the austere black dress and the flawless white skin, between the softness of her captivating face and the severity of the crude blindfold, created a tantalizing, ominous, and slightly disturbing sight. However, Sunny was not paying attention to the young woman's sublime beauty, or to her dress. Instead, his eyes were glued to a single detail. There was a leather belt tied around the beautiful stranger's slender waist, and on it hung a black scabbard. He recognized the hilt of the blade encompassed within in an instant. Quiet, quiet dancer, Cassie. For a moment, Sunny was overwhelmed by a feeling of profound, boundless relief. She was alive. Cassie was alive, all of them were. And now, despite all the dire trials of this harrowing nightmare, the four of them were finally reunited. It was as though a terrible weight that had been crushing his heart all this time, without him knowing, was suddenly lifted. Sunny felt Effie's grip on his horns grow tighter, and glanced at Kai to see that the young man's eyes were shining behind the wooden mask. The two of them had recognized Cassie, too, and were sharing in his glee. However, a moment later, Sunny's elation was gone. He remembered how and why they appeared in this field of grass to meet Cassie, and looked at Noctis with concern. The sorcerer still had an ashen face, and unlike them, he did not have any warm feelings toward the blind girl. The situation was still strange and dangerous. As if sensing his gaze, Noctis frowned, then looked at the beautiful woman with a dark expression and asked coldly, "An eyeless of the Night Temple, isn't it terribly far for a blind priestess like you to travel south, all alone? Speak, girl, what do you want?" Cassie lingered for a moment, then bowed slightly. When she spoke, her unfamiliar voice sounded deep and pleasant. She said, "Greetings, Lord Noctis. I bring a message from my mistress, the one in the north." The sorcerer grimaced. "Oh yeah, what does that dreadful woman want from me?" The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then lowered her head slightly. "She doesn't want anything, Lord Noctis. My mistress, Lady of the North, blessed of the black skies, is dead." Noctis swayed slightly, as if struck. He stared at Cassie with a pale face, then raised a trembling hand and silently grasped his neck. After a few moments, he spoke again. "What are you talking? What is the message she sent exactly?" The blind girl was still looking down. Without raising her head, she answered evenly. "Just these 3 words. I am dead." The sorcerer scoffed. "It takes weeks to get from the Night Temple to the sanctuary on foot, if one can even make it alive. Was she dead when she sent you? Huh?" Cassie silently shook her head. "No. She was alive." Noctis gritted his teeth in outrage. That woman's so insufferable. If she knew she was going to die, she could have said more than 3 words at least. After everything we shared, she just had to be frustrating till the very end. Despite the sorcerer's irritated tone, Sunny could tell that Noctis was deeply aggrieved by the stunning news Cassie had brought, as if he had not been planning to kill the one in the north himself all along. The immortals were very strange people, indeed. But Sunny was stunned himself. One of the chain lords was already dead. Just like that? After 1,000 years of solemn duty, someone had managed to kill the undying transcendent without alerting the other 4? Suddenly, A feeling of unease grasped his heart. If not one of the chain lords, then who could have killed the ruler of the Night Temple? Who else possessed one of the 7 knives? He knew of only one person. As if reading his thoughts, Noctis stared at Cassie and asked, his voice trembling with anger. So, who was it? Who killed her? Solvain or the Ivory Lord? The blind girl slowly shook her head. Neither. It was a creature that came from the fog. The sorcerer chuckled. I see. So the ivory knife fell into the hands of one of those. Ah, she could have saved herself, if she had only wanted, but she grew indifferent to things like that a long time ago, didn't she? That was her madness. Noctis remained silent for a while, and then suddenly asked, his eyes glinting with his own madness. So then, the North is in disarray, the Night Temple is without a leader, and its army needs a new commander? Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of awakened warriors, all hoping to find someone to serve and protect their families, right? Cassie lingered for a moment, then shook her head again. No. Noctis raised an eyebrow. What? Why not? She straightened, then answered simply, they are also dead. The sorcerer blinked a couple of times. Huh? Who is dead? The young woman remained still as she said, her voice calm and even. Everyone. The soldiers, the priestesses, the awakened, the families. Everyone is dead, and the northern reach stands empty. The creature took them all. Chapter 680, Lost and Found. Everyone seemed stunned into a grave silence by these words. Even Noctis, who must have heard and seen a lot during his long life. Frozen, Sonny stared at Cassie, his lightless pupils narrowing into 2 vertical slits. Everyone was dead. Everyone. Had Mordred slaughtered an entire region? Thousands of people, or even tens of thousands. Mundane humans, awakened, ascended, even the transcendent lady of the North herself. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Sonny knew, of course, that the Prince of Nothing, the owner of the friendly voice he had heard once, in the darkness of a bottomless abyss, was formidable, and would have grown more formidable still after being sent into the body of a terror. He also knew that Mordred was not completely of sound mind, and that the influence of hope would have only exacerbated that subtle fissure. But a slaughter on such scale, he had never even thought that Mordred would be capable of committing something like that. And why? What goal was the banished prince pursuing? He was never cruel without a cold and calculated reason, or at least he had not been in the past. Every monstrous act that Mordred had perpetrated before was full of perverse, but deliberate practicality. How could something like that be practical? Even forming a 7th corps would not have demanded a hecatomb of that magnitude. Sonny really did not know how to feel. On one hand, the news of a chain lord's demise was beneficial for his plans in that sense. The Prince of Nothing had already accomplished more to conquer the nightmare than the 4 of them combined. But on the other hand, Sonny just couldn't help but feel uneasy about it, about Mordred. What was the Son of Valor planning? His thoughts were interrupted by Noctis, who let out a deep sigh. Everyone is dead. Ah, I barely remember the last time something like that happened. But when I was young, at the dawn of the Age of Heroes, things like that were rather common. You wouldn't remember, I guess. That is what happens when human champions grow unfit for their duty. He looked away with a dark expression, and then added in a grim tone, and we, the champions of this kingdom, have been unfit for quite a while now, if the lords can even be called champions, still. Come to think of it, I am surprised that this had not happened sooner. He sighed again, then shrugged and turned to Cassie, seemingly having no desire to elaborate on this strange statement. Thank you for delivering this message, girl. If everyone in the North is dead, that makes you the last one then. The blind woman lingered for a moment, then nodded. Noctis pursed his lips. Ah, well, I am very sorry. For what it is worth. You are welcome to stay here, in my sanctuary. This is a place for those who are lost, lonesome, and have nowhere else to go. Don't hesitate to ask if you need anything. He turned away, as if losing any interest in the conversation. But at that moment, Cassie suddenly spoke. Actually, there is indeed something that I need. The sorcerer stopped, then looked at her with a slight frown, and asked with a bit of surprise, "Really? Oh, then tell me. I am sure I'll be able to help." The beautiful young woman placed a hand on the hilt of her rapier, and then said, her voice deep and pleasant, "I am looking for my friends. I wonder if you would be able to help me find them, Lord Noctis." Noctis blinked a couple of times, then glanced at Sunny, Kai, and Effie with a strange expression on his face. Finally, he answered in a cautious tone, "Of course, gladly. But, do you perhaps not know how your friends look, where they are, and what they are called? If so, finding them will be difficult." Cassie tilted her head, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered with a bit of confusion, "Why would I not know? I am looking for a four-armed demon, a cripple with a grating voice, and a little girl. Their names are Sunless, Nightingale, and Raised by Wolves. They should be here in your sanctuary, my lord, or at least visited it not too long ago." Noctis smiled radiantly. "You would, wouldn't you? Not knowing something like that would be very strange. Gods. Finally, someone normal. A four-armed demon, you say. A four-armed four. Huh?" The sorcerer's voice trailed off, and then he slowly turned to Sunny, seemingly struggling to say anything else. Before he managed to speak again, however, there was a sound of little feet pattering on soft grass, and a small figure collided with the young woman, hugging her with inhuman strength. "Cassie, you're alive." Despite the fact that the blind young woman could perceive several seconds into the future and had to have known that Effie was going to tackle her, a bewildered expression still appeared on her beautiful face. She remained frozen for a few seconds, and then hesitantly lowered a hand to pat the little girl on the head. Yes, I am. I am happy to see you too, Effie." The little girl stared up at Cassie and then made a pouty face. "What the hell, Cassie? How is this fair? Sunny was short but became tall. Kai was pretty but became hideous. And let's not talk about that, but you were pretty before and became even prettier now. The injustice." The young woman smiled gently and then tightly hugged the little girl. "Why, I think you became very pretty too." Noctis stared at all this, then looked at Sunny with an inexplicable expression. The immortal sorcerer hesitated for a couple of seconds and then cautiously asked, "Ah, Sunless, is this beautiful priestess one of your friends too?" Sunny glanced at him and then raised the emerald amulet. "Yes, the last friend I wanted to find. Her name is Song of the Fallen." Noctis remained silent for a while, then looked away and mumbled in a barely audible whisper, "By the moon, I guess I really need to improve my friend-making skills. Otherwise, I would not be able to call myself the friendliest man in all of the Kingdom of Hope anymore." Hearing that, Sunny smiled. He had a reason to. Their small cohort was finally back together. Chapter 681. The incredible adventures and astonishing deeds of heroic dreamer Sunless in the lonesome land of nightmares. Abridged. Soon, the four of them were gathered in Sunny's room. There was plenty of food on the table and a kettle of fragrant tea. They had a peaceful meal, avoiding discussing anything important, but soon it was time to have a serious discussion. None of the four seemed too excited about the idea, perhaps because doing so would mean revisiting their experiences in the nightmare and opening up wounds that had barely any time to heal. There were a lot of invisible scars each of them was hiding. None of the four had survived these 3 months unscathed. Effie looked at her empty plate for a few moments, and then sighed. "Can't we just have a few days off before getting to work? The world won't collapse if we take a small vacation, I think." Sunny glanced at his friends, the bruised girl, the cripple with a disfigured face, and a beautiful young woman whose empty eye sockets were covered by a black cloth, and slowly shook his head. "If we do, Noctis might grow impatient. I promise to give him an answer after I find my friends. He has already been gracious enough to abstain from killing me, putting my soul into a doll, or a mop, and ordering it to give him the knives, so we better not linger." Cassie turned her head slightly and asked, her deep, pleasant voice still sounding strange and unfamiliar, "An answer? To what question?" Sunny grimaced, then looked away. "Right. All of you must have already understood what the conflict of this nightmare is. Hope, The demon of desire, Noctis, is preparing to rebel against the will of the gods, kill the other immortals, and break her chains. And we have to either help him achieve his goal or somehow prevent hope from escaping. The former seems insane, but the latter seems impossible, considering that she is already able to influence the world from inside her prison. He shivered, grew silent for a few moments, and then added, "Each of the immortals represents, or rather embodies, one of hope's eternal shackles. They can only be destroyed by one of the sun god's knives. I am in possession of 2 of the remaining 4 knives. Noctis knows where the third is being kept, and the 4th one is in the hands of Solvain, who will freely offer it to anyone who can grant her a worthy death. So while his plan means going to war against 3 ancient saints, it is not entirely crazy, just mostly so." Sunny sighed, poured himself some tea, and concluded, "So, we need to decide whether we want to help him in this craziness or not." Cassie nodded, seemingly not surprised by what he told them. Then, she lingered for a moment and said, "Then first, we need to share everything we learned about the nightmare while we were apart. The more information we possess, the better informed our decision will be." Sunny took a sip of his tea and shrugged. That was what he wanted to do as well. He studied the faces of his companions, and then gripped the emerald amulet tighter. "In that case, I will begin, I guess." Effie, Kai, and Cassie turned to him, trying not to show how curious they really were, and who could blame them? Out of the 4, Sunny's situation was indeed the most abnormal. He hesitated for a few moments and then spoke. "As you might have noticed, the spell sent me into the body of a demon, a shadow demon, to be precise. I found myself far to the west, in the territory of the followers of war. Even worse, just seconds after coming to my senses, I stumbled upon a beautiful woman wearing red. That woman was Solvain, the transcendent priestess of War God. She easily overpowered me, but decided to keep me alive." Effie's eyes glistened when he mentioned Solvain. Kai, too, seemed to be shaken by that revelation after all. He had been an officer of the army that was embroiled in a bloody war against Solvain's cult. To soldiers of the Ivory City, her name must have been synonymous with power, death, and horror. To them, Solvain was as much of a person as she was an ancient, terrifying myth. Sunny's face grew dark. "After that, I found myself in the Red Colosseum, an ancient theater built by hope, which the warmongers had turned into a perverse temple of slaughter. There were thousands of nightmare creatures locked in its dungeons, as well as a few unlucky humans. Every day we were forced to kill each other. Those who survived received the dubious honor of fighting against the warmongers themselves, and if we somehow prevailed, well, then we got to live another day, just to repeat the whole process come dawn." He remained silent for a while, and then added, I spent 2 months in that purgatory. Of course, I would have succumbed to my wounds very fast if it wasn't for my partner, a captive young man from the Ivory City, Ilias. His healing aspect kept me alive, and I kept him alive in the arena. Together we endured the slaughter, day after day, week after week. Still, our days were numbered, so I kept searching for a way to escape. And after 2 months, I finally found it." Sunny touched the terrible scar on his neck and grinned. "Turns out all I had to do was to trick our ascended jailer into chopping my head off. Free of the collar, I killed him, and then got Elias to attach my head back." Kai, who was in the middle of taking a sip of tea, spat it out. "What?" Effie only remained silent because she was in the process of choking on a pastry. Her eyes, however, were similarly wide. Even Cassie seemed stunned. Sunny chuckled. "Ah, you see? That transcended priestess, Solvain. Actually, I had already killed her once. She had been serving as the host body for a corrupted monster, the Firekeepers, and I had slain in the dream realm to capture the wreck of Noctis's flying ship. That was where I received an enchanted armor that allows its wearer to stay alive for as long as they have essence. I also had means of regaining essence, and so I was able to survive without a head long enough for Elias to heal me." Effie finally managed to swallow her pastry and glanced at Kai with wild eyes. "Kai, tell me he's lying, please." The young man blinked a couple of times, then solemnly shook his head. The little girl swore, then mumbled in a small voice, "Crazy bastard, he's crazy." Sunny shrugged nonchalantly. What? That wasn't even the craziest part. Anyway, Ilias and I almost managed to escape the Red Colosseum, but at the last moment we were intercepted by Solvane, that cursed fiend. The smile disappeared from his face, and his black eyes flashed with cold hatred for a moment. She killed Ilias, tore my heart out, and threw my body into the sky below. Luckily for me, this demon body has two hearts, which was why I didn't die immediately. Solvane either didn't know about that or did not care, thinking that the abyss would finish me off, but I survived and found my way back to the Isles, thanks to my memories. He sighed. I survived, but was not in the best shape either physically or mentally. My one remaining heart was not enough to keep this body going, so I was effectively dying, albeit slowly. I made my way south, planning to eventually reach our rendezvous point in the east. However, before I could, I stumbled upon Noctis on the southern island. Sunny smiled bitterly. That mad bastard was very happy to see me. He thought that fate had brought us together, and who knows, maybe it did. We made a deal. He and I, Noctis, would replace my missing heart, and I would learn the location of the glass knife from a terror that resided in the nearby fortress. That terror, you see, had belonged to one of the chain lords before had belonged to the shadow. So was there a better candidate to meet him than a shadow demon? He didn't speak for a while, then let out a heavy sigh. The problem was, the centuries of loneliness and being subjected to hope's poison had driven the creature mad. So, it attacked me. That terror had power over dreams and nightmares, and he subjected me to a few hundred of those. In each one I was horribly tortured, experienced unimaginable sorrow, and was eventually killed. Luckily, I had forgotten most of those nightmares. Yeah, most of them. Sunny took a sip of tea, then shook his head. Anyway, eventually I escaped from the nightmares as well, by breaking all of them, and then killed the terror. Noctis replaced my heart, as he had promised, and brought me to the sanctuary. Here I met Kai, and we went to retrieve the glass knife and Effie from the Temple of the Chalice, and here we are. He scratched the back of his head, and then added thoughtfully, "Overall, I guess it could have been worse." Effie swore again, and then shoved another pastry into her mouth. She chewed furiously, and then hissed, sending crumbs flying across the table. What the hell could have been worse than that? Sunny stared at her for a moment and shrugged. I don't know. I could have been sent into a body of a worm. Or even worse, a child. Chapter 682. The Red Sect. Effie stared at him with no amusement whatsoever on her childish face, which only made her attempts to appear serious look more comical. Then, she scowled and said evenly, "Wanna die?" Sunny shook his head with a grin, then went into more detail about the things he had learned, including various pieces of information he had gleaned in the nightmares, his experience with the warmongers, and his observations about Solvane and Noctis. When he was done, there was silence for a while. The others were digesting all the information he had shared with them, full of thought. Well, everyone except Effie. The somber silence was soon broken by the sound of loud chewing. The little girl swallowed a piece of meat pie, then blinked a couple of times, noticing that everyone was staring at her. Finally, she wiped the oil off her lips and said, "What? I am a growing child, you know. I need to eat well to grow big." Then, she wiped her oily fingers on the tablecloth and shrugged. "Well, anyway, I guess I'll go next." The little girl glanced at Sunny, made a face, and turned away. There's not much to tell anyway. My 3 months in the Temple of the Chalice were not at all as exciting as Sunny's wild misadventures. Although, her face suddenly grew dim and dark. They weren't very pleasant either. Effie sighed, lingered for a few moments, and spoke in a somber tone. Basically, I was sent into the body of one of the Red Sect's younger disciples, an orphan girl who had been entrusted to the maidens for better or worse, but mostly worse. As I already said, their teachings had grown cruel and perverse over the centuries. Now that I know about how hope is manipulating everyone's desires, I finally understand why. That Solvane, she had been raised in the Red Sect too a long time ago. The difference is she managed to escape. But we didn't. The little girl trembled, I ran away once early on and managed to make it to the Iron Hand Island, but I was caught, and the punishment at the time, they already knew that nothing they did to me would make me obedient. So they punished the others in my stead. After that, well, I did not try to escape again, at least while the other girls were still alive. Effie grew silent for a bit, then shrugged. So it was pretty boring. Just endless training, battle training, essence training, body conditioning, and all that stuff. How to endure pain, how to endure fear, how to steel your will, how to be a perfect, merciless, lethal vessel of war. Of course, they were very inventive in their lessons. What better way to teach someone to endure pain than to torture them to the brink of death? Or over it, if the pupil is weak. The little girl's face turned distant. In the end, everyone turned out to be weak, except for me. She took a bite out of her piece of meat pie, chewed it slowly, and then said, "One time, they put me in a coffin and buried me alive for a few days, to teach me how to conquer the fear of darkness. These wretches who said that I was afraid of darkness to begin with, so stupid. But mostly it was just combat training. They trained us ruthlessly. There's a lot you can achieve with a few awakened healers and no regard for whether your disciples survive or not. If we broke a bone, the healers would put it back together and order us to continue. If we bled too much, well, you get the idea." Effie shook her head. The thing was, though, that I was getting it even worse than the rest. The girl whose body I took had the misfortune of awakening at a very young age, you see. So, the maidens saw her as their promised chosen one, a prodigious warrior fated to slay Solvain and wash away the humiliation she had visited upon the sect to avenge her sin and sacrilege. So they worked me harder than anyone else. The little girl looked away, then sighed. The weirdest part was that all the vile crap they did to us was done without any hint of hatred, malevolence, or bad intentions. On the contrary, the older maidens treated us like their little sisters when they were not torturing and killing us, of course. My teacher, Hildy, I think she thought of me as her own daughter. She cared. A lot of good it did, in the end. She hesitated for a moment, and then grimaced. Well, anyway, eventually I was the only one left. Actually, I think they went harder on the other girls because of me. My presence reignited their fervor, I think. After everyone else died and the maidens had nothing else to hold over my head, I started planning my escape. I had no idea if I would survive it, but luckily, before I had the chance to find out, Sunny and Kai came and obliterated the whole sect. Cheers. Thanks, by the way. She nodded at them and then stuffed her mouth with another piece of the pie, clearly unwilling to say anything else. Everyone remained silent until Cassie leaned over and put her hand on the little girl's shoulder. She gripped it softly and said, "You did well, Effie. You did well to survive." Effie looked down, sighed, and then said darkly, but this time, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to save a few people too. But I failed, who cares though? I am really way too old to be this sentimental. Or maybe that hope already did a number on my brain. This is just a nightmare after all. Hearing a little girl proclaiming that she was too old to feel grief would have been funny, if it wasn't so sad. No one said anything until Kai leaned back and sighed. Then his grating voice resounded in the stone room, sending shivers running down Sunny's spine. Well, in that case, I guess it is my turn. My story is not that long, though. I didn't do much. He glanced at his hands, with skin that had been replaced by polished tree bark, remained silent for a bit, and then added, I only fought a dragon, and lost. Chapter 683, To Kill a Dragon. Kai remained silent for a while, and then let out a heavy sigh. He looked away, picked up his charred wooden mask, and stared at it for a few moments, then finally spoke. I was sent into the body of a centurion of the Sun Legion, the army of the Ivory City. The city, you must have seen it when we entered the nightmare, rising from the ashes as the time flowed in reverse. It is a wondrous place, beautiful, peaceful, and full of life, with people who are warm, kind, and care deeply for their neighbors. Dozens of flourishing islands, all connected into a single whole by the aerial bridges and arching aqueducts built of white stone. The young man paused, grimaced, and took a sip of honey tea to smooth his aching vocal cords. Then he glanced at the mask again, lingered for a moment, and continued. At least that was what I thought at the start of it. Looking back, I was terribly naive, but it was so easy to be misled by how the Ivory City, and its people, appeared, especially by the stark contrast between the splendor of that enchanting facade and the barefaced vileness of those who wished to destroy it. The merciless, mad killers, warmongers. Kai shook his head. The people of the Ivory City are just like those we know in the waking world. They have the same values, the same ideals, the same regard for decency and human life. Now that I say it aloud, I realize they might be doing much better than us in that regard. My point is that they seemed nice. Their city was like a beautiful paradise, like a place that all human cities should strive to be. Was it so unexpected, then, that in this nightmare, there was someone who wanted to destroy it? His eyes grew dim. The followers of the cult of glory, on the other hand, were exactly like what one would imagine the forces of evil to be. Merciless, cruel raiders that worshipped war, slaughter, and bloodshed, killing simply for the sake of killing. Their perverse fate, their zealous belief that by destroying the lives of innocent people they were delivering the gift of salvation to their victims, murderers and madmen, each and every one of them. So, you might understand why I was blinded to the truth for a while. The young man took another sip of tea, then put down the mask and looked at them with a dark expression. In my naivete, I came to believe myself to be a hero of a grim fairy tale, a noble warrior tasked with protecting a beautiful paradise from the tide of evil. I mistakenly considered the fate of the Ivory City to be the true conflict of the nightmare, and so convinced myself that protecting it was what we had been sent here to do. Unable to abandon my duty and reluctant to become a deserter, I remained with the Sun Legion, thinking that sooner or later you guys will join me. Kai looked down and sighed heavily. And so, very soon, I became known as a hero of the Legion. His disfigured face contorted for a moment, but then the young man restrained his emotions and smiled bleakly. I know that fact might sound surprising. Unlike the rest of you, I have never been a fearsome warrior. I have never been a dauntless leader of men as well. My only real act of bravery was facing the Spire messengers in the shadow of the Crimson Spire, and even then, I only survived because of Cassie. So I was very surprised to find myself gaining fame and renown as a fearless battle commander. Kai looked at them, lingered for a moment, and then said with uncertainty, "The war between the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, you see, has been going on for centuries. Its bloody tides come and go, like those of the sea. Sometimes, only small skirmishes and raids happen for decades, and sometimes there are terrible battles happening every day. Sometimes, only mundane soldiers and awakened officers fight each other, and sometimes ascended champions appear to sow devastation on the battlefield. Sometimes even the transcendent lords descend." He paused for a few moments, took a sip of tea, then continued in a neutral tone. At the time, I found myself in the center of a sudden shift from a prolonged period of relative calm to the start of a massive offensive by the warmongers, and very early on I discovered an unexpected truth. He glanced at them, thought for a second, as though carefully choosing his words, and said, "You see, I was always under the impression that warriors of this mythical era, when gods were still alive and magic permeated the world, were infinitely more knowledgeable, powerful, and proficient in battle than we, humans of the waking world, are. But as it turns out, that is not so. Maybe a long time ago, during what they call the Age of Heroes, they had been. But now most of them are far less deadly than we have become. At least those of us who had been forged and tempered by the Forgotten Shore." Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised by that statement. Noticing his expression, Kai tilted his head a little. "Nightmare creatures are nowhere near as numerous here as they are in the future. There is no spell, no nightmares, no trial of the dream realm, no gates unlike them. Each of us had been forced into a life of bloodshed and conflict, thrown against unimaginable horrors with no choice to retreat or surrender. The spell might be a cruel teacher, but its vile lessons seem to be morbidly effective. Grow stronger or die. There is no other way for us. So, most awakened from the real world would have experienced more strife and battle encounters than an average awakened warrior of this time period." He sighed, and then added somberly, "That was why even I, despite my humble aspect and lacking battle prowess, was able to stand out. I led my soldiers to victory, keeping them alive through the sudden attack by a large force of the warmongers. And then, I kept them alive through the rest of the campaign, wreaking havoc on the enemy anywhere my centuria appeared." Kai grew quiet for a long time, and then added, his ugly voice suddenly sounding especially hoarse and grating, "And that was how I gained the attention of the radiant lord of my city of Severax, the Ivory Dragon." Chapter 684. You Must Become a Dragon. Kai poured more tea into his cup, then cradled it in his hands and looked away. He remained silent for a bit, then continued the ominous story. After many weeks of battles and bloodshed, the warmongers were pushed back, and my centuria was recalled back to the Ivory City to rest and recuperate from the hardships of war. We were met by a jubilant crowd that showered us with rose petals and sang our names, my name too, louder than all the rest. Ah, what a beautiful sight it was. Victorious, we returned home, and everything was well. For a while, we enjoyed the beauty of the city and the warm company of our fellow citizens. He took a sip, then shook his head slightly. The more I explored the beautiful Ivory City, the more elated I was by its prosperity and its harmonious way of life. It seemed as though people there were all content and happy, treating others with sincere kindness, love, and respect. It was as though they didn't have a care in the world, and there was a reason for that. The people of the Ivory City could live this way, and be this way, because they were protected by the mighty dragon, Severax, a true descendant of Sun God, their lord and protector. The young man shivered, then added in a hoarse voice, "The dragon protected them, provided for them, and guided them with his wisdom. It was because of him that the Ivory City was safe, sound, prosperous, and welcoming, why its citizens were so kind and happy. This was a paradise of his creation." Kai took a sip of tea and smiled sadly. "Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it?" "Ah, but it was. I was just too slow to see it." He remained silent for a bit, then let out a long sigh. "At first I only felt it. A slight, vague wrongness, as if something was off with these kind, happy, beautiful people, as if there was something hidden behind their sincere smiles. I dismissed it, thinking that it was just my prejudice speaking, a mindset that I brought with me from the waking world. But the more time I spent with them, the more strange details I started to notice. And soon, a harrowing suspicion took hold of my heart." Kai looked at them, his face growing dark. A suspicion that there was madness hidden deep in their lustrous eyes. The same madness that the warmongers were infected with, albeit of a different shade. I had never felt as disturbed and afraid as when that thought first entered my mind. I was so afraid, in fact, that for a few days I closed my eyes to the truth and pretended that nothing was wrong. But the suspicion kept gnawing on my heart, and so I decided to investigate. It wasn't hard to confirm it. A bitter grimace contorted his hideous face. You see, as it turned out, the Ivory City was indeed prosperous, safe, and beautiful because of the dragon. Its people were indeed protected and provided for by the dragon. In return, the dragon only asked for one thing in return. The young man clenched the teacup, almost causing it to crack. To feed him. He gritted his teeth for a moment, then said quietly, "To feed him with human flesh. 7 sacrifices had to be made to him every month, from the ranks of the citizens, and the kind, warm people of the Ivory City were more than happy to provide. Ecstatic, even. Being devoured by the dragon was considered to be a sacred honor, and having a loved one chosen as a sacrifice was a cause for celebration." The young man grew silent, then said hoarsely, "The dragon never dictated who had to be fed to him. But the people of the Ivory City wanted above all else to please the dragon, and so they always chose the best and the brightest, the most beautiful, the most talented, the most innocent, the most desirable. And there we were, young heroes who had just returned from a triumphant war. The month was up, and so they chose me and 6 of my most brave and loyal soldiers." Kai smiled bitterly. What a reward. The sight of them was the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. Parents surrendering their children to death with zealous smiles. husbands sending their wives into the dragon's maw with wild joy, friends and neighbors singing and laughing as they led their fellow humans to be eaten by a hungry beast. Only little children did not share in their glee. They cried when their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters were torn away from them, not understanding what was happening. But the crying children were punished and taught a harsh lesson about how repugnant their behavior was. He grimaced, then put his cup down and looked away. The whole city was insane. Perhaps one could argue that a few dozen souls a year are a small price to pay for a paradise. But what is a paradise built on blood worth? Worthless. It's worthless. And even if it's not, at least the wretches could have made the sacrifice without the ghoulish joy, without the songs, and the zeal, and the kind, warm, sincere smiles on their beautiful faces. Kai took a deep breath, remained silent for a while, and then shrugged dismissively. Anyway, we were brought to an island that bordered the ivory tower itself and chained to a white cliff. The jubilant crowd disappeared, and soon after that, we heard the rustle of mighty wings. The dragon landed in front of the cliff, as majestic and fearsome as he was in the legends. A great beast with beautiful ivory scales and radiant golden eyes that were full of wisdom, nobility, and inhuman intelligence. Effie was listening with wide eyes, biting her fingers. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore and asked in her soft, childish voice, "How the hell did you survive? Why didn't the dragon's flames kill you?" A sad smile appeared on Kai's disfigured face. "How did I survive? Oh, that was simple, really. When Severax appeared, I broke my chains and shielded my comrades, ready to defend them until my last breath. Seeing this, the dragon, he spoke to me. His smile slowly disappeared, replaced by an expression of anger, shame, and regret. You must have already guessed that Ivory Dragon Severax is also Severus, the Ivory Lord, one of the Hope's eternal shackles, a transcendent whose transformation ability allows him to turn into a dragon. He is a human, or at least was a human once, a long time ago. And so, he spoke to me." The young man sighed. He was amused by my reaction. We spoke, and what he told me, it broke me. A little, I think, you see, I had it all wrong. The dragon, he had never once asked the people of the Ivory City to sacrifice anyone or anything to him. They had invented the story themselves and chose the number of the victims themselves and started bringing him sacrifices of their own free will, because doing so made them feel as though they were binding themselves to the dragon, that they were becoming a part of the dragon, and so were of the dragon and safe from him. Kai shook his head. Severax, Severus. He had lost a part of himself a long time ago, I think. He told me that in the beginning he wanted to be a good lord for the people, someone whom they could see and whom they could strive to become. And so, he rarely appeared in his transcendent form before them. But as centuries passed, he noticed that people were disturbed by his human face, and were only at peace when he came as a dragon, as if they needed him to be something else, something greater than them. And so, after a while, he abandoned his human form completely, and not long after that, the sacrifices began. The young man lingered for a few moments, and then continued. I asked him to spare our lives, but he refused. He told me that he had never accepted an unwilling sacrifice, and I was free. But the other 6, it was as though they were in a trance or had gone mad. They didn't even try to save themselves. No matter how I begged him to spare them, he refused. This was what his people desired, what they needed. They might have not been bound to him, but he was bound to them, burdened by them. And so, when nothing else worked, I foolishly tried to stop him. He smiled bitterly. But how could I defeat a dragon? I am not a dragon myself, after all. He swatted me to the ground with one swipe of his tail, breaking my ribs and almost killing me. But I did not die instead, paralyzed. I watched as he turned his head, opened his maw, and turned my soldiers into ash with one immolating breath. Kai grew silent, his face unmoving. After a while he spoke again. Overwhelmed with anger, grief, and despair, I screamed at him, cursing him, swearing that I will tell everyone the truth, that I will make them realize, that I will make them change. But he just looked at me tiredly and said that I will see. And then, the ivory dragon was gone, leaving me alone on the empty island. He looked down. I was too injured to move. and spent the rest of the night in the throes of pain. In the morning, the citizens of the Ivory City came. When they saw that I was alive, a pale smile appeared on his hideous face. They were stunned, scared, and angry, and so they built a pyre, tied me to a stake, and burned me. No matter what I tried to say, no matter how I tried to make them understand, they wouldn't listen. They only grew more scared and hateful. The dragon, he had been right. He had told me the truth. I saw. Kai picked up his tea, took a sip, and looked away. My bindings broke before I died, and so, horribly burned, I shot into the sky like a spark. I flew away from the city and somehow survived. Crippled and heartbroken, I slowly made my way east, finally reaching the Iron Hand Island and then the sanctuary where Sunny eventually found me. Lord Noctis had replaced my burned skin and damaged muscles with enchanted wood and tree bark, and here I am. As good as new. He sighed, looked at them, and smiled. Luckily, I had friends that helped me pick myself up, you guys. I'll do whatever it is you decide to do. But if there is one thing I want to say, it is this. If Noctis wants to kill Lord Severax and end the dragon's reign, I would be happy to lend a hand. Chapter 685. Temple of the Night. When Kai was finished with his story, everyone remained silent for a while. Eventually the young man sighed and stretched out his hands, which were covered in polished bark, and looked more like those of one of the sailor dolls than those of a human. He moved his fingers and then smiled lightly. Noctis did a wonderful job of healing my wounds. Just as he had said, some of the pain remains, but I am as strong and capable as I had been before. No, even more so, these enchanted limbs he gave me are much more sensitive to soul essence, and so they are more durable and powerful than my own flesh had been. I also collected a few memories during my time in the Sun Legion. Overall, my battle prowess has increased a lot since we entered the nightmare, not to mention the experience I earned and the lessons I was taught. Whatever comes, I am ready. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then let out a low growl. What about the other transcendent of the Ivory City? The Sun Prince. Have you met him? Kai frowned and made a vague gesture with his hand. Yes, I think. The Sun Prince is supposed to be a brother of Severax. Among the people, it is believed that his soul resides inside the metal colossus that guards the Ivory City and sometimes leads the Sun Legion into battle. I've seen him once, from afar, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure if that thing is sentient or not. He hesitated for a bit, and then added, You've seen him too. I think that it is his corpse that swings beneath the shipwreck island, tangled in the chain, although I can't quite imagine what kind of force could have destroyed that implacable giant. He is at least 90 meters tall, with a body cast out of solid steel and nearly invincible. He is also not a living creature, really, and so can't be killed by wounding or damaging his body. Sunny remained silent for a bit, and then said, There is nothing that can't be killed or destroyed. Not even the gods. So then 3 of the Chain Lords are accounted for in the future. We've seen the bones of the dragon, Severax, on the Ivory Island, and both his brother and Solvane found their doom near the wreck of Noctis's ship. But what? What exactly happened? How did they fall, and how did Hope escape? What happened to Noctis himself, as well as the one in the north? How was the Ivory City destroyed? How did the tower break free of its chains? No one answered, as perplexed as he was. After some time, Cassie finally spoke. I am not sure what happened, but I know one thing, because of our arrival, it is happening faster. They turned to her, and after a moment of silence, Sunny asked, Yours is the last story left, and to be honest, it is the story I am interested in hearing the most, because it concerns the 5th awakened sent here by the spell. Mordred, he found a way to enter the seed with us, didn't he? Cassie sighed heavily and turned her head away. After a while, she said, Yes, he did. The blind young woman remained silent for a few moments, gathering her thoughts, and then faced them again. Unlike what happened to the 3 of you, my arrival into the nightmare was not too harrowing, at least not at the start. I was sent into the body of a young priestess whose duty was to tend to the high priestess of the Night Temple, the one in the north. In this era, the Night Temple still belongs to the cult of the goddess of the black skies, of Storm God, the deity of darkness, stars, and guidance, and so no light is allowed on the temple's premises. She touched her blindfold briefly, then slowly lowered her hand. The acolytes spend long years living in the darkness and blind themselves before becoming priestesses. For that reason they are known as the eyeless. Many of the eyeless are seers and possess powers of prophecy and divination. For most, becoming a blind priestess inside a lightless temple would have been a terrible trial, but for me it was strangely soothing. To find myself among those similar to me, in a place where my blindness wasn't an aberrant oddity, but instead a choice. A pale smile appeared on her lips. However, it was my lady that I found the most comfort in. The one in the north, the oracle of the night. She was not unkind. She treated me well enough, and I have learned a lot from her knowledge and wisdom. However, just like the rest of the chain lords, she was being consumed by an insidious madness. Hers was the madness of apathy. Over the centuries, my lady grew indifferent to most things happening in the world, or even to herself. That was why she needed attendants, and I was one of them. The smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face. That didn't mean that she was powerless or without responsibility, though. All of the northern reaches of the Kingdom of Hope were under her authority and protection. There were many villages and several towns full of mundane humans who relied on the Night Temple for safety and guidance. For that reason, the one in the north ruled not only over the blind priestesses, but also over a small but fearsome army comprised of both mundane warriors and awakened. She sighed slightly. Their numbers might not have been as large as those of the armies of the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, but due to their prowess and my lady's prophetic gift, the North was never attacked by either. The people rarely suffered from the nightmare creatures as well. Cassie grew silent, and a scowl slowly appeared on her beautiful face. But as the one in the North grew more and more indifferent, that slowly started to change. Still, when I found myself in the Night Temple, things were still more or less fine. Her scowl deepened, and her face grew dark and despondent. The blind young woman lingered, and then said in a grim voice, "Until they weren't." Chapter 6, Autoed 86, Creature of the Fog. It was getting late, and darkness crawled into the stone room, drowning its corners in shadows. Cassie sat motionlessly, the graceful lines of her beautiful face contorted by a deep scowl. Then a heavy sigh escaped from her lips. It started soon after I entered the nightmare, but no one paid it much attention at first. There were just strange rumors that reached the temple, resembling scary stories that people like to tell each other when the sun is gone and darkness envelops the world. Rumors of a pleasant voice that came from the fog. She gritted her teeth for a moment. Perhaps if my lady's affliction was not as severe, we could have done something then, after all. In this world, scary stories often come true, and this one was more ominous than the rest, because it had to do with the fog. The Night Temple stands at the boundary of the Hollow Mountains, after all, and of the mist that shrouds them. But she was distant and uncaring, and so we had grown aloof too. Cassie somberly shook her head, then continued, her low, deep voice enveloping the room and her three listeners. As time went by, the rumors started to change. They grew more menacing and dire, telling tales of people who listened to the fog and disappeared without a trace. At that point, the eyeless grew concerned, suspecting that a corrupted creature had found its way into their land. Many of them possessed a high affinity to revelation, after all, and they could feel it. Unease, threat, danger. So, a priestess was sent to investigate, escorted by a squad of experienced awakened soldiers, and at the same time, it was decided that a divination would be performed. She lingered for a moment. The divination showed no result, and the priestess she failed to return with useful clues. In fact, she did not return at all. She and her escort disappeared without a trace, as though they had never existed. Just like the people from the rumors only, by then, no one thought of them as mere rumors anymore. The blind young woman shivered, then said in an even voice, "Finally, we became alarmed. The army was summoned, and many hunting parties were sent out to find the creature. Mundane soldiers, awakened warriors, ascended champions, the eyeless, everyone was determined to catch the abomination. But despite all our efforts, we failed. How could we catch the fog?" Cassie's face darkened, and all the while people continued to disappear. First one or two at a time, then scores of them, and then one day we found a whole village that stood empty, not a sign of its inhabitants in sight. Everyone there, every man, woman, and child was taken by the fog. She grew silent for a few moments, then added grimly, and then, hunting parties started to disappear too. Powerful, experienced soldiers. We even lost an ascended. The worst part, however, was that there was no pattern to the creature's movements, at least none that we could recognize. It could attack a settlement far to the west one day, and then suddenly take someone far to the east the next. It was almost as if it could be in several places at the same time. Because of that, we couldn't throw all our forces into one location and corner it on a single island. And so, we constructed a trap for it. All we needed was a lure, and I volunteered to become one. The blind young woman shook her head. Of course, back then, I didn't know that the fiend of the fog was far more cunning and devious than any nightmare creature I had ever faced. But I found out very soon, because that was when I met him again. And as soon as I did, I realized that what we thought of as a trap for the fiend was, instead, a trap that the Prince of War lured us in instead. Cassie gritted her teeth, because while our forces were concentrated to form the encirclement, most of the northern reach remained unprotected. And so, left without defenders, one of the towns was taken by the fog, 1,000 souls gone, slaughtered. A deep scowl appeared on Sonny's face. He leaned forward, piercing her with an intense gaze. What? How? If he was engaged in a battle with the forces of the Night Temple, how did the bastards simultaneously attack the settlement? She lingered for a while, then said with a hint of uncertainty that Mordred, he was not how he had been in the future. He had grown weaker somehow, as if he did not possess 6 soul cores anymore. But, instead, there were 5 strange creatures helping him, like the lesser versions of the one you had killed on the Reckoning Island. While we fought the prince himself, the 5 creatures attacked the town that we had left unprotected, slaughtering every human who lived there. Sonny leaned back, stunned. What? 5 of them, 5 reflections? Did he tear his soul apart to create them, granting each a single soul core? Suddenly, a frightening thought entered his mind. No, this can't be. Divine aspect holders like Mordred and him followed a slightly different path than the rest of the awakened. Unlike those with aspects of a lesser rank, they could create 7 soul cores by absorbing fragments, whether of souls or shadows didn't matter. But there was still a limit to the number of cores they could create, and to grow more powerful after that, they had to challenge nightmares like everyone else. So, Mordred's slaughter did not make any sense. He had already been a terror in the future after all. Creatures, however, followed a path that was different entirely and almost reversed. By absorbing fragments, they did not create new soul cores. Instead, they rose in rank, like Saint, for example, who had to consume shadow fragments from memories in order to ascend. If Mordred's reflections were the same as Saint, if they only needed a certain quantity of fragments to rank up, then there was no limit to how many fragments they could devour, and no end to their growth, not until they reached the mythical divine rank. So if the Prince of Nothing sacrificed 5 of his 6 soul cores to create 5 awakened beasts, then what was their rank now, after consuming thousands upon thousands of souls? Chapter 6I-87, Oracle of the Night. Effie and Kai seemed like they had some questions, but they chose to remain silent, at least for now. Of course, they knew who Mordred was and had a general impression of his powers. Sonny and Cassie had described their experience in the Night Temple to them in enough detail so that their friends, as well as the Firekeepers, knew what they would be facing should they cross paths with the Prince of Nothing. However, even Sonny himself had only a vague understanding of how Mordred's aspect functioned, and so did Cassie. So hearing how powerful he had grown in the nightmare was a shock to him. The mirror beast was a devil. Had it been created as such, or had it earned more cores in battles with powerful nightmare creatures, as Saint did? If it is the former, then does it mean that Mordred was more than a terror once? He had many reflections before Clan Valor imprisoned him, too. Gods, just what kind of a menace was Anvil's firstborn in the past? And more importantly, just how dangerous was he going to become in the future? His somber thoughts were interrupted by Cassie, who spoke again after remaining silent for a while. In any case, destroying Mordred's body was not too hard. He appeared wearing the body of the priestess who had been first sent to find him anyway. But of course, doing so was useless because he could just take another. In the chaos of the battle, I couldn't explain what dire powers the enemy possessed to the forces of the Night Temple. And more than that, she shook her head somberly. In the moment, I was not sure that it would have been the right thing to do. Was I meant to help the inhabitants of the nightmare slay one of the awakened from the waking world? Were we not supposed to be allies? No matter how vile Mordred was, and despite what had happened between us in the past, here in the nightmare, both he and I were meant to pursue the same goal. The blind young woman sighed. So, after a bloody battle, Mordred escaped our trap and disappeared. Soon after that, we learned of the massacre that had taken place while we were distracted by his deceit, and after witnessing the desolate town that his reflection had slaughtered, I was disabused of the notion that he and I were the same in any way. Sadly, by that time, it was already too late. Cassie lowered her head, then continued quietly. After feasting on the souls of the town's inhabitants, the reflections became much more powerful. Mordred was not bound by the necessity to stay hidden anymore as well. His attacks grew much more frequent and devastating, and the number of his victims started to grow with chilling speed. The more people he killed, the more dangerous he became. He was not invincible, of course, among the awakened serving the Night Temple. There were a lot of those who possessed means to contain him, especially the eyeless, who, like me, were immune to his possession. But Mordred knew that as well, and so he went after those who could threaten him first. She paused for a moment, her face growing solemn. Eventually, people, those who were still alive at least, became so terrified that they left their homes and fled to the Night Temple, hoping that the High Priestess would protect them. The army and the priestesses grew desperate as well. We begged the one in the north to intervene. She was a transcendent, and an oracle without an equal, after all, and despite her indifference, my lady promised to face the creature herself. That day, people were so relieved that they held a grand celebration. Cassie remained silent for a while, and then continued, her voice growing sad and wistful. While everyone was celebrating, however, my lady summoned me in secret and asked me to deliver a message to her old friend, Lord Noctis in the East. Just 3 words, I am dead. She paused for a moment and turned away, her beautiful face growing still. I was appalled, of course. What about her immortality? What about all these people whom she promised to protect? She smiled sadly and told me that they were all dead as well, and that it was better that way. A heavy sigh escaped from Cassie's lips. I left the next morning and made my way south all alone. Traveling through the wilderness of the Kingdom of Hope, blind and without anyone's help, was not easy, but I managed to survive somehow. Whether by luck or due to the one in the north protecting me, Mordred never intercepted me. I had to face a few powerful nightmare creatures, though, as well as other dangers along the way. I overcame these obstacles and eventually reached the sanctuary. And on the day that I arrived, I finally felt it, the sudden change. A dark expression appeared on her face. My lady had died, and another flaw was added to Hope's prison. The approaching disaster was accelerated even more. You know the rest. For a moment, Sunny could sense a hint of profound sorrow in Cassie's voice, but then it disappeared, and the blind young woman smiled. So, now I guess we know enough to make a decision about whether or not to support Noctis in his war against the rest of the Chain Lords. He frowned and then said in a grim tone, "There is one thing we don't know, though. Something that can potentially change everything. Mordred, what is his goal? What is he going to do when the 4 Chain Lords go to war?" Cassie hesitated and slowly shook her head. "That I don't know. He must have realized the nature of the nightmare's conflict himself by now, or maybe he had always known it, through means that none of us can even guess about. He was the one who had sought out this seed, put the idea of seeking out the knives into our heads, and manipulated us into bringing him here, after all. No matter what his goal is, though, I doubt that he just wants to become a master. He is here for something else as well." Sunny remained silent for a bit, then let out a frustrated growl and turned away. "All right then. I guess it is time to choose our fate." Chapter 688. Big Decision. No one spoke for a while, before Effie finally broke the silence. I mean, it is not much of a choice, is it? Sure, going against 3 immortal saints does not seem like a picnic, but we already know that they had been defeated in the end somehow, so it is not impossible to do, and we don't even know what the alternative is. How do we ensure that Hope doesn't escape her prison? Kill Noctis? That would only delay the inevitable, since this whole damned place is already on the verge of collapse because of her influence. That Hope, she is scary. She hesitated for a moment, then asked with a bit of confusion, "To be honest, I'm not even sure what she is. What kind of a demon is powerful enough to drive a whole region mad? Is she unholy?" Sunny sighed, then massaged his temples. "No, if anything, she is divine. She is also not a demon, she is a daemon. Demons were lesser deities of sorts, who are said to have created themselves. They appeared out of nowhere, possessing powers that were similar to those of the gods, but different. The spell has a weird tendency to never mention the word daemon, though for some reason. In any case, it seems that the gods and the daemons eventually had a big, terrible war, and Hope's imprisonment and escape were a prelude to that war, I think." Effie listened to him without any particular expression, then said listlessly, "Oh, well, in that case, that just proves my point. Trying to keep a thing like her in chains. Doesn't killing 3 immortal saints suddenly seem easy, in comparison?" Kai moved slightly, and then his hoarse voice suddenly resounded in the stone room. "I think we are looking at it wrong. The question is not what should we do, it is what should be done, don't you think? Yes, there is no particular way in which a nightmare has to be resolved, but that doesn't mean that some resolutions cannot be right, and some cannot be wrong. This land has been turned into hell by Hope, who is trying to escape her chains. Until she is released, that will not change." He leaned forward, frowned, and added somberly, "The Red Colosseum, the Ivory City, and all across the ruins of her kingdom, madness reigns, turning humans into wicked perversions of themselves. Sure, we can win by prolonging it. But should we? Would we be at peace with such a conclusion? You can call me naive, but I think that although the spell does not dictate what the challengers do in the nightmare, it still matters why we do it. We are still responsible for our actions and their consequences. So, I think that we need to do what is right." Sunny glanced at him and then asked, his voice harsh, "Who's to say what is right? How do you know that by releasing Hope, we won't be dooming everyone living here to an instant death? 1,000 years in chains, personally, I would have been a bit angry." Kai lingered for a moment, then shook his head. "You are right. I might not know what is right, but I do know what is wrong. And what I saw here was deeply, deeply wrong." Sunny stared at him for a bit, then shrugged. "Well, it's not like I disagree. In fact, I hate this place with a passion. I don't really care if Hope simply kills everyone either. As far as I'm concerned, the bastards deserve it." He waited for a few moments, then turned to Cassie. "What about you? You've been terribly quiet." The blind young woman hesitated for a while, then spoke evenly. "I am willing to do whatever you decide. I'll trust your judgment, Sunny." He frowned, studying her face with a dark expression. "Why, you don't have an opinion?" Cassie remained silent for a bit, then simply shook her head. Damnation. He knew, of course, why the blind girl was reluctant to speak. She must have seen something, a glimpse of the future that she did not want to share, knowing that it would affect their thinking, possibly informing the very event she wanted to happen or wished to avoid. Her own opinion was already compromised by that knowledge, and so Cassie had decided to remove herself from the decision completely. It seemed as though she had grown wary of her visions and the consequences of acting on them after the Forgotten Shore. Damned oracles. Sunny sighed, then glanced at Effie and Kai. "Well, then there is not much to discuss. The 2 of you are keen to join Noctis, and I guess I am too. He might be a madman, but at least he is a madman we know, and I also sort of like the guy. Despite the fact that he is a dishonest, lying, conniving, crazy, dastardly cheat. No one is perfect, you know." Effie giggled. "Wow, it's almost as if he's reminding me of someone. Huh? Now who might that be?" Then she grinned at Sunny and asked, "That's settled then. So should we go and deliver the good news to that dastardly cheat? You know about how he doesn't need to kill us and put our souls into home appliances? She seemed like she was ready to go, but Sunny stopped her with a hesitant gesture. This next part he had thought about it a lot, not knowing if it was the right thing to do or a giant mistake. He was still not sure, but had a feeling that the decision he had made in the end was a correct one. At least it felt that way. In any case, there was no going back. Sunny remained silent for a bit, and then glanced at his friends with a tense expression. Before we do, there is something I need to tell you. Effie and Kai stared at him with slight surprise written on their faces, while Cassie's eyebrows suddenly flew up. She already knew what was about to happen, of course. Kai looked at him and smiled. Oh, what is it? Sunny sighed, turned away, then faced them and shrugged. Ah, it's nothing too serious. Just, well, to tell you the truth. He gripped the emerald amulet tighter and said, My flaw is that I can't lie. I have a true name, which I received in my first nightmare. My aspect is of the divine rank. I have 3 soul cores, actually, shadow cores, which technically makes me a demon. Hence this ugly body. I have already unlocked my aspect's legacy. I inherited the lineage of one of the 7 demons. Oh, and also, how do I say this? I might be Lord Mongrel. Sorry about that one, Kai. Chapter 689, Trust. Effie, who was already standing up to leave, froze, then slowly sat back down. Kai dropped his wooden mask to the floor and stared at him with wide eyes. Even Cassie seemed a bit stunned, despite knowing most of the things he had just said already. A deathly silence settled in the room, and Sunny found himself being pierced by 2 dumbfounded gazes. He scratched his neck, then coughed awkwardly and looked away. Yeah, that's more or less all that I wanted to say. Of course, the decision to reveal these secrets to his friends had not been an easy one. In fact, it went against everything that Sunny believed in. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was making a terrible mistake. But instinct was not always the best advisor. Otherwise, what was the point of having intelligence and the ability to think about your decisions? The fact of the matter was that Sunny had already done irreparable damage to his relationships once because of his untrusting nature. Back on the Forgotten Shore, he had kept his secrets a little bit too well, failing to understand how his deceptiveness would make others perceive him. Sure, he had a reason to behave the way he had, and yes, he had never really lied to his allies, simply withholding or manipulating the information a little to keep himself safe. But the others did not know about his reasons. All they knew was that their trust was never returned fully, and that he was full of secrets, discrepancies, and insidiously subtle ways to keep those secrets to himself. Sunny had never explained himself, and in the absence of an explanation, the misunderstanding was bound to inevitably take its place, perhaps to dire results. Who knew if he had been more open with Nephis, she might have not considered him a liar, absorbing that false perception into her own forming self. Would things have ended differently then? Regardless, currently Sunny knew both the aspects and, more importantly, the flaws of every member of the cohort. But they couldn't say the same. They revealed their weaknesses to him, but he held on to his own, failing to reciprocate this trust. For now, everything seemed fine. But that one-sided nature of their friendship was bound to fester in the future, and the small crack it created could grow in size, eventually destroying it. Plus, even Mordred knew his secrets. It would have been silly if the Prince of Nothing did, but Effie and Kai did not. Not to mention dangerous. So, Sunny decided to take a leap of faith and put his trust in his friends. It had been a long time coming anyway, but damnation. Why did being honest with people feel so disgusting? What a loathsome sensation, curses. I'm all itchy. After a full minute of stunned silence, Effie finally spoke, her voice sounding uncharacteristically tame. Now, hold on, wait a minute. She raised her small hand and showed one finger. Your flaw, we sort of already had a general idea. After spending so much time with you, it is still wait, you can't lie at all? What? Sunny shrugged. I can't say a lie aloud, and I am compelled to answer any question asked of me truthfully, or at least to the best of my ability. He expected some sort of spicy question to follow immediately, but Effie remained silent, showing just how bewildered she was. Even her usual mischievousness disappeared. Instead, the little girl simply raised a second finger. All right, The true name, we sort of figured that out too. You seemed reluctant to share it for some reason, so Kai and I did not press. Sunny let out a heavy sigh, hesitated for a moment, then forced himself to speak. That has to do with an innate ability of my aspect. If certain conditions are met, it can make me vulnerable to those who know my true name. That is why I kept it a secret, and also put a lot of effort into appearing as weak and pathetic as possible, so that no one would even suspect that a weakling like me could possess a true name. His face grew a bit dim. Being considered a weakling is generally great, because it makes enemies underestimate you. I'm more than fine with people thinking little of me. But, after I started pretending, things got out of hand really fast. Effie blinked a couple of times, remained silent for a moment, and raised a third finger. Well, I guess that explains a few things. Now, about Lord Mongrel, we knew, of course. I mean, it was sort of obvious. At that point, both Kai and Cassie turned to her and spoke simultaneously. Kai seemed even more surprised than before. What? I didn't know. Cassie, meanwhile, seemed a bit confused. She asked hesitantly, I am sorry, but who is Lord Mongrel? Effie stared at them with a funny expression. What do you mean you did not know? You were the one who helped him buy that armor. Kai opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Wait, what armor? I helped the stone armor from the memory market. That dusty, ugly thing? No, it's not the same. The material is completely different. The fit, the design, Mongrel's armor is very chic. Not at all like that cumbersome stone clunker. Sunny covered his face, then said somberly, the stone changes to a stone-like metal due to an enchantment. It was just broken and required an awaken to activate the restoration process. As for the fit, you do remember that memories adjust themselves to accommodate the owner's body, right? Hell, now that I have a tail, even it is armored when I summon the mantle. The young man stared at him with a lost expression, then leaned back on his chair. Oh, I see then. But I mean, no, never mind. Sunny massaged his temples. I never meant for Mongrel to get famous. I just wanted to practice swordsmanship in the dreamscape, and all good aliases were already taken. Who knew that a damned broadcaster would spread the clip of me dispatching him everywhere on the network? Oh gods, and things only got worse after that. Effie looked at him, then at her 3 fingers, then made a little fist. But the rest, a divine aspect? What? Do those even exist? 3 soul cores? A daemon's lineage. What even is that? And what is next? Are you going to tell us that you have a divine memory, or something? The little girl let out a nervous giggle and mockingly shook her head. Sunny stared at her for a bit, then cautiously cleared his throat. Well, actually I have 2. Chapter 690, 1 question. Sometime later, Sunny left the room, walked between the tall menhirs, and entered the sprawling garden of the sanctuary. The cohort had intended to talk to Noctis together, but after his bombshell of a revelation, the others needed some time to digest all the new information and decided to stay behind. Understandable. In truth, Sunny wanted to be alone for a few minutes as well. Although he felt that he had made the right decision, revealing his secrets was an uncomfortable experience. He felt as if an invisible weight had been lifted off his shoulders, a bit, but also rattled and uneasy. He felt naked. Sunny could use a little solitude to gather his thoughts, too. After the initial shock, he had gone into more detail about his capabilities, explaining how a divine aspect worked, and the circumstances of how he earned it. However, it was not like he knew a lot about this matter himself, so the conversation was not too long. It had helped the others better understand his powers, as well as that of Nephis and, most importantly, of Mordred. Now, they were as ready to face the Prince of Nothing as they could be, should a conflict with him happen. Additionally, due to everyone gaining deeper insight into Sunny's powers, their already profound synergy as a battle unit was bound to grow even more refined. Sunny kept a few things to himself as well. The difference was that if before there had been a strange dynamic between him and his friends, where they pretended to not know that he wasn't being entirely honest with them, and he pretended to not know that they knew now, the existence of those white spots had been openly acknowledged by him. Effie and Kai understood that there were things he wasn't ready to share, and why he was reluctant to do so. They seemed to respect his wishes. All in all, it went surprisingly well. Walking through the beautiful garden, which was illuminated by the pale light of the full moon, Sunny enjoyed the tranquil air of the sanctuary. At some point, however, a slightly disconcerting thought entered his mind. I wonder, was this decision of mine influenced to some degree by Hope's poison? If so, what deep desire of mine had she amplified to push me toward being honest with my friends, for a change? Suddenly thoughtful, Sunny approached the door of the sorcerer's lair, waited patiently for the sailor dolls to open it, and walked inside. Maybe I was always— His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his hand shot to the side, ready to grasp the shaft of the cruel sight. Something was very wrong inside the dark hall. A thick, nauseating smell of blood invaded his nostrils, sending adrenaline coursing through his own. It surrounded him like a suffocating wave, as though a terrible massacre had just taken place in the immortal sorcerer's quarters. But Sunny did not see any corpses. The central chamber was just as he had left it the last time, empty of all furniture, with a vast circle of runes drawn on the stone floor. No, not entirely the same. The floor had cracked in several places, as though something was pushing at it from beneath, exerting devastating pressure on the ancient stones. Noctis was still in the center of the circle. One of his sleeves was rolled up, and there was a deep cut on his left wrist, a stream of blood running down his hand and falling down like a crimson ribbon. In his other hand, he held the diamond sickle. The sorcerer was surrounded by a shallow pool of blood. However, it somehow failed to touch the hems of his garments. Sunny stared at him for a few moments, noticing that the stone surface seemed to be slowly absorbing the blood. Then, he gripped the emerald amulet and asked evenly, "Are you trying to kill yourself?" Noctis slowly opened his eyes, glanced at Sunny, and smiled brightly. Then, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening, he wiped the diamond sickle, hid it in the folds of his silk garment, and stood up. "What? Of course not. I'm too young to die." Sunny gave him a dubious look. "Young? You are at least 1,000 years old." The sorcerer tilted his head, scratched his cheek with a thoughtful look, and then smiled even brighter. "What? Of course not. I'm too beautiful to die." Happy with himself, Noctis somehow made the cut on his wrist close, jumped over the pool of blood, and walked toward Sunny with a relaxed expression. "Come, this place needs to be aired, I think. The garden is nice and chill, though." Sunny threw one last look at the disappearing pool of blood. Did he imagine it, or had the stone floor of the chamber trembled slightly? Just then, shaking his head, he turned away and followed Noctis outside. Together they slowly headed for the altar island. Noctis seemed to enjoy the silence of the moonlit garden a lot. A minute or two later, though, he broke it with a carefree question. "So, what did you want to tell me? Have you and your friends come to a decision?" Sunny hesitated for a moment, then answered, "We did. We will help you free Hope." Noctis grinned. "Oh, wonderful." After that, he didn't say anything else. Sunny waited for a while, a little confused. They had already reached the white altar and sat down on a stone bench, enjoying the sight of the pristine lake, with a pale circle of the moon reflecting on its calm surface, and yet the sorcerer seemed to lose his ability to speak. Slightly irritated, Sunny hesitated for a moment and then asked awkwardly, "So, do you need me to give you the knives?" Noctis looked at him with an easy smile and shrugged. "Ah, no need. Keep them." Sunny's eye twitched. "What do you mean, keep them? Wasn't the knives what you were after?" The immortal sorcerer looked at the reflection of the moon, then waved a hand vaguely. "We can deal with them when the time comes. Things will sort themselves out one way or another." He remained silent for a bit, and then added, his smile slowly disappearing, "Now that the one in the north is dead, things will start moving faster. The other chain lords are probably already in motion." Noctis sighed, then leaned back and looked up at the sky. "We won't have as much time to prepare as I would have hoped. 2 months, perhaps, maybe even less. You and your friends should spend that time wisely. Once the end starts, we won't have an opportunity to relax like this until it's all over." Sunny grew silent, then looked at the tranquil lake. After a few moments, he said, "We will help you, but I have some questions." Amused by that statement, Noctis laughed. "You even have questions on a night like this? Sunless, You should learn how to enjoy yourself from time to time. Take a moment and appreciate the world. Otherwise, what is the point in living? Sunny glanced at him with a deadpan expression. Do I look like someone who knows what the point of living is? Thanks for the advice. I'll take your words to heart. However, I still have questions. The sorcerer made a dour face and sighed. All right, one question. I'll answer one question. So think well before asking it. Sunny did not speak for a while, staring at the reflection of the moon. His face grew serious, deep shadows veiling his eyes. After several minutes spent in silence, he finally frowned, looked at Noctis, and said, Then tell me this one thing. Why did Sun God destroy Hope's kingdom? The immortal raised his eyebrows, then threw his head back and laughed. By the moon, of all the questions in the world, you just had to ask this one, didn't you? He shook his head and then looked away. Well, a deal is a deal. I'll answer, like many others who tried to answer this question over the centuries. Some said that it was because she was a daemon. Others said that it was because she was too powerful, that she had grown too prideful, or that she had grown too radiant, outshining even the Lord of Light. But they were all wrong. In truth, at least what I think is the truth, Hope wasn't punished because she was too powerful, too prideful, or too radiant. He remained silent for a few moments, and then sighed. It was because she was worshipped. Chapter 691, Heresy. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, absorbing what Noctis had told him. The altar island was calm and tranquil, the lake surrounding it shimmering in the darkness with the reflected moonlight. The branches of the ancient tree swayed gently above his head. Because she was worshipped. He snorted and looked away, feeling bitterly disappointed for some reason. After a while, he said darkly, So what? That is all there is? Sun God was jealous? The sorcerer glanced at him, lingered for a moment, and then slowly shook his head. No, he wasn't. Noctis remained silent for a bit, then sighed. The gods had never shown any animosity toward demons. In fact, their relationship was somewhat friendly. In the battles of the ancient times, they even fought side by side as allies. He frowned. Neither had the gods ever cared about whom or what the mortals worshipped. There were all kinds of silly cults before. There were rulers that proclaimed themselves divine, people who built temples to beasts and spirits, some oddballs even worshipped rocks, or the corrupted abominations by the moon, can you imagine? But the gods did not mind at all. The sorcerer glanced up at the sky, thought for a bit, and then said somberly, However, people had never worshipped a daemon before Hope. The daemons, you see, are elusive and solitary creatures by nature. There is the eldest, mysterious weaver, the demon of fate, who is shrouded in countless layers of lies. Then there is the youngest, Nether, the demon of destiny, who secluded himself in the darkness of the underworld. There is the demon of oblivion, whose name is long forgotten. Sunny listened attentively, absorbing the new information. Already accustomed to wielding the emerald medallion, he reflexively let go of the beautiful stone and allowed it to hang from the chain wrapped around his fingers, so that his thoughts remained private. So the prince of the underworld was actually called Nether? I wonder which came first, the name or the title, and he was also the demon of destiny, it seems. Wait, aren't fate and destiny the same thing? I guess they're not. The rune for destiny can also mean choice after all. So, was he actually the demon of choice? His thoughts were interrupted by the sorcerer's wistful voice. And the rest, each a personification of calamity and disaster. Mysterious, distant, and terrifying, each and every one of them, or at least they were, until the demon of desire decided to come and live among us mortals, becoming known as Hope. She built her kingdom here, and soon people learned to love her, and not long after that they started to worship her. Noctis paused and then continued, his face growing darker. And that was when we learned that while the gods were friendly to daemons and indifferent to mortals building temples to beasts, spirits, and rocks, they would not allow a daemon to be worshipped. They were so unwilling, in fact, that the Lord of Light brought down his flames upon the mortal realm, obliterating a whole chunk of it. Sunny frowned, feeling a cold sense of dread permeate his heart. Remembering one of his nightmares, he shivered. But why? The sorcerer looked at him with a bit of surprise and shrugged. Who knows? I guess only the gods do well. And maybe a daemon or two. I doubt that even Hope knew what she had done wrong, but maybe she does now. In any case, after her imprisonment, slowly, the idea of worshipping a daemon became tantamount to heresy. Noctis suddenly laughed. What a strange word, heresy, don't you think? It had not even existed when I was young, you know. But then suddenly, each of the 6 cults started treating daemon worshippers as criminals, pests who were spreading a vile disease, and the concept of heresy was invented. Now, becoming a heretic means being hunted down and saying goodbye to your life. He grew silent and then sighed. We did not know it at the time, of course, but the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope was a turning point in history. With it, the Age of Heroes ended, and the current one, whatever it will be called one day, began. Ah, what a dreadful era. Nothing has gone right from then on. Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking that there was something strange about this whole story. Nothing made sense. The gods and the daemons had been allies once? Knowing that they would eventually clash in a devastating war, he could not quite believe it, however. On second thought, the prince of the underworld Nether was indeed described as having been close with the goddess of the black skies once. Who was to say that the other daemons had not consorted with the gods as well? But that only made the divine punishment that the Lord of Light had brought down upon the Kingdom of Hope more inexplicable and strange. And who had they been allied together against? The creatures of the void. What was the exact timeline of all this convoluted nonsense? The Age of Heroes had ended with the imprisonment of Hope, but when had it started, and what had been happening before? Damn, so many questions. Sunny glanced at Noctis, hesitated for a few moments, and then grasped the emerald amulet again. However, the sorcerer was having none of it. He glanced at Sunny and said with a smile, I feel like you are about to ask me a question. That would be the second question. Wait, no, the second one was whether or not Sun God was jealous. Wicked demon, you tricked me. Noctis shook his head, looked at Sunny with reproach and stood up. Shame on you, Sunless. Good night. Tell your friends to prepare well in the time that we have left. With that, the sorcerer gave him another hurt look, then turned away and started walking back toward his residence. After a few steps, however, he stopped and said in his usual carefree manner, Oh yes, I almost forgot. You will have to go and retrieve the third knife too. Don't worry though, it is not going to be hard. Rather easy, really. Sunny, who was staring at the tranquil lake with a dark expression, simply nodded. Sure, wait, what? Why do we have to do it? Go and get it yourself. Noctis hesitated for a bit, then sighed. Ah, I wish that I could. But well, I might have said some nonsense about how my friend should only give the knife to someone of pure thought and heart or something like that. And sadly, while I am the most outstanding person in all of the Kingdom of Hope in many regards, purity is not my strong suit. You and your friends, however, you reek of purity, well, one or two of you at least for now. With that, the sorcerer winked at Sunny and strolled away, whistling a jovial tune. Sunny watched him go, and then shook his head with a bewildered expression on his face. Wait, did he just swindle me into getting another knife for him, again? He blinked a couple of times and clenched his 4 fists. Damnation. Chapter 692, Free Time. After their conversation under that full moon, Noctis had secluded himself in his residence for a couple of weeks. Sunny tried to talk with the eccentric sorcerer a few times, but the silent sailor dolls refused to open the door and just stared at him with their crude wooden faces. There was, of course, the option of simply using Shadow Step to get inside, but somehow, Sunny suspected that intruding upon the immortal transcendent would not have been the best idea. There were real souls trapped inside these sailor dolls, after all. In the end, he and the other members of the cohort had no choice but to follow the advice Noctis gave him, to rest and prepare for what was about to come. Luckily, there were a lot of preparations they had to do. While all 4 had trained themselves extensively before entering the nightmare, many things happened since then. There were a lot of lessons they had learned in these 3 terrible months, most of them bringing the 4 awakened to the very door of death. Now that they had time, they could go over everything they had learned, revisit it, and truly absorb it into their bones, connecting the new knowledge and skills to their foundation in a solid manner. For Sunny, that meant several things. The first one was shadow dance. He had found himself in a strange situation, having made the recent breakthrough inside of a nightmare that he did not really remember. Sunny could guess that mastering the third step of his battle style was tied to the fact that he had lived through countless nightmares and lost himself in them, becoming truly shapeless and formless, forgetting himself and turning into other people completely. That observation was in line with how he had initially made progress to the third step of Shadow Step, back in the arena of the Red Colosseum, where he shadowed numerous nightmare creatures. Back then, he had almost lost himself as well, but stopped at the last moment, fearing that he would not be able to come back. Being trapped in the nightmares had made that frightening step for him, and so he had approached the very edge of a breakthrough. The final piece of the puzzle had been trying to shadow the epitome of formlessness, another shadow, nightmare. As a result of the breakthrough, Sunny's ability to recognize and gain insight into patterns of combat techniques had increased even more, now allowing him to understand and predict not only the movements and behavior of his enemies, but also intricately sense the flow of essence through their bodies, as well as almost, but not quite, being able to predict their very thoughts. However, there was one glaring flaw in this miraculous ability, one that he didn't know how to solve. For the first time since Sunny had created Shadow Dance, the elusive battle art was starting to seem dangerous, not only for his enemies, but also for himself. What was the point of being able to kill something if he ran the risk of losing himself and becoming that thing forever? To kill a dragon, one had to become a dragon. Why would anyone want to achieve such a victory if earning it meant ceasing to be themselves and becoming the very thing they had wanted to destroy? For now, he didn't have a solution, and that made him more than a little bit nervous. So Sunny decided to temporarily concentrate on other things. He spent a large part of his days practicing archery with Kai. Sunny quickly realized that he would never be as talented of an archer as his friend was, but that did not mean that he could not achieve great results. In fact, his aim and skill with the bow were increasing at a steady pace. Still, there was a question of distributing the tools the cohort possessed in the most efficient manner. So Sunny reluctantly tried to lend Morgan's warbow to Kai. It was for naught, though, because of the unbending enchantment of the bow. His friend was simply not strong enough to draw it. When their training sessions were over, Sunny would usually return to his room and spent the rest of the day fruitlessly practicing weaving. He had achieved some progress in his attempt to learn how to copy enchantments, but not enough to make the altered weaves stable. The number of memories he had won in the Red Colosseum was dwindling by the day, with no apparent result, which made Sunny very frustrated. It seemed that he had hit a bottleneck in his understanding of how spell weaves were supposed to work, and was in need of a mental breakthrough to push himself any further. That breakthrough was not in a hurry to come, though. When the day was over and darkness encroached upon the world, Sunny turned to the third and most time-consuming part of his preparations, collecting shadow fragments to form his fourth core. Leaving the sanctuary, he would travel to nearby islands in search of nightmare creatures to hunt, and killed those he could find and that were not beyond his ability to defeat. By now, less than 150 fragments separated him from becoming a devil. The number seemed so small, but at the same time was more troublesome than it should have been. The problem was in the fact that there were not as many nightmare creatures in the Kingdom of Hope as there had been on the Chained Isles in the future, especially not that close to the stronghold of one of the Chain Lords. As the result, his progress was torturously slow and tedious. To accelerate it somehow, Sunny had made a frightening decision to leave the surface of the islands and take his hunting to their underside, where the true horrors of this land dwelled. Luckily, his new body was somewhat fit to do so. With his sharp claws and talons, he was able to climb any surface, no matter how steep, or even remain mobile while hanging entirely upside down. And if he made a mistake, the heavenly burden was always at hand. In combination with his swiftly improving archery skill and determination to form a new core before the culmination of the nightmare arrived, Sunny was able to slay many dwellers of the dark side. There were indeed terrible and morbid creatures, and more than a few left scars on his body. But it was still not fast enough. By the end of the first 2 weeks, He was still not even halfway to his goal. And on that day, quietly and without any fanfare, something else happened. Somewhere out there, in the wild reaches of the dream realm, Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan had finally become a tyrant. Chapter 693, Knowledge of Everything. Sunny was in his room, watching as a memory disintegrated into a whirlwind of shimmering sparks, a dark expression on his face. He didn't need the spell to inform him to know that he had just lost another one. And yet, the ever-helpful spell still whispered into his ear. "Your memory has been destroyed." Sunny snarled, then shook his head bitterly and summoned the runes, intending to check on how many expendable memories he still had left. It was then that he decided to check on Nef's progress, which had long ago become a deeply ingrained habit of his. Seeing that Changing Star was still alive and fighting brought him both relief and grim motivation. Already sensing what he was about to see, Sunny stared at the runes and read, Name, Nephis. True name, Changing Star. Rank Dreamer. Class Tyrant. Soul Cores, 5 sevens. Soul Fragments, 0 5000. He looked at the runes for some time, then sighed and dismissed them. Just a few days ago, she was still far away from reaching the 5th core. After the Red Colosseum and his battle with Nightmare, the gap between them had shortened even more, but now, Neph had gone and done something crazy again, making it grow vast and infuriating once more. He stared at the walls of his room darkly. It was as though the two of them were constantly playing an insane game of tug-of-war, fully knowing that one wrong move meant death, but equally unwilling to let the opponent win. And from the very start of it, he had never been in the lead. How tiresome. Sunny shook his head, realizing that he was in no mood to blindly throw himself at the impregnable barrier of weaving anymore. At least not today. His solemn mood changed, however, when the shadows he had stationed across from the sorcerer's door saw it open, and the familiar figure walk out, then wince at the bright sun. Noctis looked a bit disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and slightly messy hair. Considering who it was, though, Sunny could only guess whether the immortal was tired or just hungover. Still, this wasn't a chance he was ready to miss. Wasting some essence to step through the shadows, Sunny appeared a few meters away from Noctis and looked at him with a guarded expression. The sorcerer blinked a couple of times, then put on a friendly smile. "Sunless, you are still here? Haven't we just talked?" Sunny inwardly rolled his eyes. "That was 2 weeks ago. 15 days, technically." Noctis raised an eyebrow, shifted from foot to foot awkwardly, and then cleared his throat. "Oh, really? Well, what a nice day. Can I help you with something, then?" Sunny stared at the sorcerer for a few moments, then nodded. Yes, in fact you can." The immortal transcendent smiled brightly. "Well, why didn't you say so? We are friends, are we not? And friends are supposed to help each other. So what do you need?" Sunny gripped the emerald amulet tighter, hesitated for a second, and then said, "Can you teach me sorcery?" Noctis continued to smile for a bit, then laughed. "That's it? Sure, no problem. I am the greatest sorcerer in the Kingdom of Hope, after all. Under my guidance, you will become a distinguished sorcerer yourself in no time. Let me think if we start right now." As Sunny smiled tentatively, he looked at the sky to gauge the time of day, thought for a bit, and then added, "We'll be finished at about the same time, 100 years from now. Let us start." Sunny blinked. "What? 100 years?" The sorcerer frowned a little, then shrugged. "Well, maybe 200 years. That was how long it took me to learn the basics, if you mean true sorcery, of course. Not those pitiful tricks others consider to be miracles. Actually, what do you think sorcery is?" Sunny hesitated, then said with uncertainty, "The ability to manipulate magical energies through means that fall outside one's aspect?" Noctis stared at him for a bit, then sighed. A good enough answer, but no. Simply put, there is no such thing as sorcery. Or rather, there is no single thing called sorcery. But there are various ways to twist the underlying laws of the world to produce some effect, desirable or not. What we call sorcery is just a structured method of achieving a predictable result while doing so, with whatever means you possess. Usually with the help of soul essence. He looked around, observing the landscape of the sanctuary, and added, "Take me, for example. My aspect has to do with souls, and so I was able to learn a few things from the followers of Heart God, the god of souls as well as emotions, memory, hunger, and growth. However, I only became a true sorcerer after learning Hope's magic." Sunny tilted his head a little. "Hope's magic?" Noctis nodded. "Ah, yes. The most common type of sorcery used by mortals, blindly and without a true understanding of its nature, I might add, comes from Hope. She is the one who invented writing, after all, and gifted it to us humans. What a wonderful invention it was. Writing itself does not produce sorcery, though." He hesitated, and then added, "Before Hope invented writing, the most common type of sorcery used by mortals, even more blindly, was the sorcery of names. You see, Sunless, everything that exists has a name. In fact, you might even say that a thing only starts to exist after it is given a name. A flower is just a flower, one among many, until you call it a rose. Then, roses are suddenly different from all the other flowers, and so, they come to exist." Sunny frowned, not sure that he understood what the hell Noctis was talking about. Wouldn't roses exist even if they were not called roses? Well, in a sense they wouldn't. Flowers that looked like roses would, but they would not be called roses, and so there would not be roses. How confusing. The sorcerer, meanwhile, ignored his befuddlement and continued, "However, not all names are equal. Some are simply given and aren't worth much, while others have to be earned, and those names, the true names of things, hold power over them. Names are a powerful thing, Sunless, and so, a long time ago, people who learned those names could share in that power. However, their authority was obscure and fleeting, since it was only invoked when someone said the names aloud, and saying them with a mortal mouth was not an easy feat." He suddenly smiled. But that was what made Hope's invention so ingenious, you see. Once writing appeared, one with enough knowledge could connect the names to material objects, granting the invocation permanence. Of course, it is not that simple. In fact, knowing the names of things and how to shape them into songs and phrases is incredibly hard, because with the knowledge of names comes the knowledge of everything. Noctis let out a heavy sigh. Simply scribbling a rune without understanding its meaning would not do anything. So, it takes centuries to learn the very basics of runic sorcery. Unless you are intrinsically predisposed to it, of course, which no one is, except for Hope herself. But I will gladly teach you everything I know. If you have a century or two to spare, I mean." The sorcerer smiled brightly and stared at Sunny, sincerity written all over his obnoxiously beautiful face. That slimy bastard. Of course, Sunny did not have a couple of centuries to spare. But maybe he didn't need to. Names are a powerful thing. Suddenly, a seed of an idea appeared in his mind. Maybe some other time." Noctis sighed with regret and opened his mouth to say something. But the four-armed demon was already gone, swallowed by shadows. The sorcerer stared at the shadows with a sour face, then shook his head and sighed again. What a strange fellow. Chapter 694, Key Piece. Back in the Red Colosseum, Sunny had spent an excruciating amount of time remembering and comparing the weaves of different memories in order to understand what they had in common. In his mind, there were three traits that all memories shared: the ability to be summoned and dismissed, the ability to repair themselves while dismissed, and the connection to the wielder's soul. By recognizing these three universal parts of the weave patterns, he thought that he had learned how to reproduce these simplest enchantments, at least to the point where he managed to create a simple pattern that allowed an item to be dismissed and summoned from essence. However, there was a fourth quality that all memories shared, one that he had not thought about. All memories had a name. I am an idiot, such an idiot. He of all people should have known what power names wielded, considering that his own true name was literally the key to having absolute control over him. Appearing from the shadows that nestled in his room, Sunny fell on the bed and summoned the silver bell, the memory with which he was familiar the most. He had spent countless hours studying its weave and trying to comprehend the secrets of how it worked to little avail, up until now. Staring beneath the surface of the small bell, he saw the beautiful and complicated pattern of ethereal strings that permeated it, with a single dimly glowing ember in its middle. By now, Sunny had managed to recognize the parts of the weave that were responsible for all its unique qualities, or so he thought. There were the 3 segments of the pattern that he had learned in the Red Colosseum, and the rest was the single enchantment of the bell. However, despite knowing all the parts, Sunny could never make sense of the whole weave, as though something was missing, making all his attempts to comprehend the logic and connections of the ethereal strings useless. There is one more element. The silver bell does have only a single enchantment, but it also has a name, the name that differentiates it from every other memory, and thus allows it to exist somehow. Sunny stared at the part of the weave that he had thought was representing the enchantment for a long time, then summoned another memory and studied it as well. The task of separating one completely unique part of the weave from another completely unique part seemed impossible. At first, after all, he had nothing to use as a reference. But he had something even better. The intrinsic predisposition to weaving that he had inherited from the demon of fate, the very quality that Noctis had mentioned Hope possessed when it came to runic sorcery, as its creator. Sunny, of course, was no weaver, but he was able to intuitively sense the purpose of spell-weave elements due to his connection to the enigmatic daemon. That talent was literally in his blood. All Sunny had to do now was carefully examine each and every string comprising the vast pattern and sense which ones were meant to create sound, and which had no purpose he knew of. The ones he knew nothing about had to do something with the name. Hours passed, and soon it grew dark outside. Sunny continued to stare at the small silver bell, forgetting about his nightly hunt, and at some point in the middle of the night his eyes suddenly widened. There is it? Yes, I see it. Finally, he had managed to isolate the part of the weave that had nothing to do with the 3 universal enchantments, but also didn't seem to be connected to the actual purpose of the bell, producing a ringing that could be heard from kilometers away. This had to be the part of the spell weave that described the name of the memory. Such a vast and intricate pattern of ethereal strings, all to express 2 simple words. Silver bell. As soon as Sunny mentally connected these 2 words with the pattern, a strange thing happened. The weave of the silver bell remained the same, but he suddenly saw it differently. It was as though the whole thing completely transformed in front of his eyes, while not changing at all. The disparate parts suddenly seemed harmoniously connected, and the chaotic and senseless structure of the weave suddenly appeared to possess a strange and mysterious but elegant and undeniable logic. He was stunned. How did I not see this? The pattern was suddenly so much more open to him, so much easier to discern. And in the middle of it, weaving through every part of the tapestry of ethereal strings, was the name, Silver Bell, which served as the bridge and the unifying element between them. No wonder every memory I tried to modify collapsed. I only missed the most important thing. Damn. Sunny studied the weave of the silver bell with wide eyes, seeing the familiar parts of it in a new light. Then, however, a slight frown appeared on his face. Wait, what is that? Now that he saw the entirety of the logic behind the pattern, or rather, of the logic behind its foundational structure, he could also see an element that seemed alien to his understanding. By now, no part of this weave was supposed to remain unknown to him. And yet, there was one. More than that part of the weave was vast and terribly complicated, as much inherent to the whole structure of the memory as its name. It was hard to notice at first, but if one knew what to look for, it was almost impossible to ignore. It is very pretty. But what the hell is it? He scowled, then glanced at the other memory, wishing to compare its weave to that of the silver bell. To Sunny's surprise, the vast and beautiful underlying pattern was there as well, its presence as strange and unexplainable as before. Suddenly tense, he summoned all of his memories one after another, studying them and finding the mysterious pattern everywhere. What the hell is it? Sunny had no idea, and even his intuition was silent, not providing any hint as to the purpose of the ever-present hidden weave. The only clue he found was that a part of it bore a distant resemblance to the weave of the moonlight shard, and that its overall structure slightly resembled that of the name of the silver bell. However, the mysterious pattern was incomparably vaster and deeper. He scowled, and then suddenly tilted his head with a surprised expression. Moonlight light. Sunny glanced at the weave again, and then froze. Lost from light? Chapter 695. Sonorous silver bell. When morning came, Sonny was sitting on the floor with a wild look on his bestial face, his black coarse hair in a mess. There was a glowing golden needle in one of his hands, and a small silver bell in the other. The other two held a flute that seemed to be either cut from jade or made out of polished emerald bone. That was probably the best memory he had received in the Red Colosseum. But right now, Sonny couldn't care about the flute any less. Instead, all his attention was concentrated on the small bell. Holding his breath, Sonny raised and shook it. However, instead of the clear ringing that would be heard from kilometers away, all he heard was a barely audible, melodious whisper. A wild grin slowly appeared on his face, illuminating his face. I've done it. I really did. Barely containing his excitement, Sonny summoned the runes and read the description of the bell. Memory, silver bell. Memory rank, dormant. Memory tier 2. Memory description. A small memento of a long-lost home, which once brought its owner comfort and joy. Its clear ringing can be heard from miles away. Memory enchantments. Silver song, sonorous. Silver song enchantment description. The ringing of this bell is not overly loud, but can be heard across a vast distance. Sonorous enchantment description. The owner can decide how loud this bell will ring. Sonny's eyes glistened with joy. Of course, these two enchantments were not that powerful. However, that did not matter. What mattered was the fact that there were now two of them, despite that there had only been one before. He had finally managed to successfully copy and transplant an enchantment, albeit a simple one. He had studied the emerald bone flute, painstakingly recreated the weave of the sonorous enchantment, and integrated it into the weave of the silver bell without destroying it. He had done it. He added a new enchantment to a memory. Failing to wipe the wide grin from his face, Sonny looked beneath the surface of the small bell. Now, its spell weave looked very different. Where there had once only been strings of ethereal light, now there were black strings made of shadows as well. The two types of strings were intricately intertwined to create a complicated and yet harmonious pattern. More than that, the pattern of the silver bell used to have only one glowing ember that served as a nexus for the ethereal threads. But now, there were two, knowing that an additional enchantment would require a more powerful foundation. Sonny had used one of the soul shards in his possession to create a new anchor. All of this had only been possible because of his new insight into the structure of weaves. Knowing that the name of a memory was integral to its spell weave allowed Sonny to see the pattern as a whole, and so he was finally able to change it without destroying the thing entirely. Of course, he was still unable to even think about creating an enchantment of his own, but taking an already existing enchantment pattern and transplanting it into a different memory was not outside of the realm of possibility for him anymore. Granted, it was not an easy process. Just the simple sonorous enchantment took a whole night and an ocean of shadow essence to create. And that was after he had spent months staring at the silver bell and studying its spell weave. But still, gods, the possibilities were almost infinite. The ability to modify and change his memories could open countless doors for him, in time, and that was only scratching the surface of his recent breakthrough. Just the fact that he had been able to raise the tier of the silver bell by adding an additional anchor was already promising enough. Yes, it would take a lot of time and effort to solidify this success and learn how to copy enchantments faster and more reliably. There would be plenty of failures along the way. But the more Sonny practiced, the more he would come to know about the logic and essence of weaving. One day in the future, he would gain enough knowledge and experience to take the next step and learn how to modify and change the enchantments themselves, altering their function. And one day after that, far in the future, he just might learn enough to try creating an enchantment and a memory of his own. On the day he succeeded in that daunting endeavor, on that day, Sonny would earn the right to call himself a true sorcerer. On that day, he would become a weaver. Much later, Sonny emerged from his room, stared at the bright sun with a dissatisfied expression, yawned, and walked toward the spot where he and Kai usually practiced archery. His friend was already there, wearing his charred wooden mask. There was a bow in his hands and a quiver of arrows by his feet. Noticing the four-armed demon, Kai turned his head and waved, greeting him. "Good morning." Sunny rubbed his face, then revealed his sharp fangs in a frightening smile. What's good about it? Ah, doesn't matter. Shall we start? The young man looked at him for a bit, then shrugged. Sure. But where have you been these last few days? Sunny blinked a couple of times. In my room? Wait, a few days past? Huh? I must have lost track of time. Kai tilted his head, then suddenly glanced at Sunny's hands. Oh, wait. Where is that emerald amulet Noctis gave you? Sunny glanced down with a guilty look, lingered for a bit, and answered reluctantly, Oh, that thing, I sort of broke it. The young man's eyes widened. You broke weight? Then how am I hearing you? At that moment, Sunny grinned and produced a simple-looking rock from the folds of his black kimono, then proudly presented it to Kai. The archer stared at it with confusion. Is it the ordinary rock? Continuing to grin, Sunny shook his head. Then the rock suddenly spoke in his voice. It was, but now it is the extraordinary rock. I improved it, I guess. Now it can do the same thing as the amulet, but as an active enchantment. So, no more blurting random thoughts from me. What a relief I can curse out anyone I want in peace again. Can have some mental privacy again. It can also be really, really loud. So, its name changed as well. Kai stared at him in bewilderment for a bit, then shook his head. Well, this is great, but sadly, we don't have time to discuss it in detail, or practice archery for that matter. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Really? Why? The young man sighed, then stood up and picked up his quiver. It's Noctis, he wants to see us. Chapter 696, Extraordinary Rock. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed and followed Kai through the garden. He felt a little uneasy about meeting Noctis. Surely he won't be mad at me for breaking his amulet. Well, who cares anyway? That slick bastard owes me too much already. Destroying the emerald amulet had not been his plan. Sunny just really wanted to find a more efficient method of expressing himself, and the sorcerer's gift was the only thing in his possession that had a suitable enchantment. The problem was that the enchantment was made with runes, and not a weave, so Sunny had no way to reproduce it. He could, however, try to turn the amulet into a memory. Sunny had already achieved something similar back in the Red Colosseum by weaving a basic enchantment of summoning into his slave collar. However, the process had never been completed because the enchantment was destroyed in the clash with the collar's own magic, lasting only long enough to allow him to escape the cage. Now, however, Sunny had plenty of time to make another attempt. This time, armed with his new knowledge, he had a far better chance of success. Of course, it was not guaranteed, so he started by experimenting with a beautifully crafted wooden chair in his room. Slowly and tediously, he created countless strings of the essence and weaved the 3 basic enchantments into the piece of furniture, only to see them, and the soul shard he had used as an anchor, disintegrate into a rain of ethereal sparks. After thinking for a while and replenishing his essence, Sunny repeated the process, but this time with one additional step. He also weaved his true name into the pattern, using it as the beacon for the enchantment that was responsible for connecting the memory to the owner's soul. And so, the chair became a memory of sorts. Now, there was in the list of memories he owned, with a description that stated, "This chair was turned into a memory by Lost from Light, for reasons unknown." The chair could be summoned and dismissed at will, and even repaired itself while stored within his soul. It could also be fed to Saint, increasing her shadow fragment count by half a point, since the single soul shard Sunny had used to create the weave was of the awakened rank. Satisfied with that, Sunny waited for his cores to regenerate enough essence and repeated the process once again, now with the emerald amulet itself. Sadly, the result was not the same. He did manage to make the amulet into a memory. What was more, in the process, the spell itself transformed the enchantment of the amulet from runic to a weave, showing just how ingenious Weaver's creation was. However, the resulting pattern turned out to be unstable. Perhaps because of the alien nature of the amulet's magic, or perhaps because Sunny did not know its name, or how to name it using strings, it began to slowly unravel almost immediately after the transformation. All Sunny could do was feverishly study the weave of the swiftly decaying memory before it completely fell apart. Soon, the amulet destroyed itself. But Sunny still managed to copy its enchantment onto the ordinary rock, as well as adding a new anchor to the weave of the rock, thus elevating it to the second tier. He also went ahead and copied the sonorous enchantment onto it as well. When he did, the name of the memory changed, and the ordinary rock became the extraordinary rock. Overall, Sunny was very pleased with himself, not only because he managed to recreate another enchantment and confirm his ability to turn soul shards into food for his shadows, but also because he would finally be able to speak his mind without speaking everything that was on his mind in the process. Gods knew he needed that. The only bad thing about the whole situation was that Noctis's gift was destroyed. But, with some luck, the sorcerer would not even notice. Whatever. They met Effie near the wooden door. By now, the little girl's bruises had healed, and she looked like a vigorous, healthy child again. She was also gnawing on a large bone with a wild look on her face, seemingly making even the sailor dolls a bit nervous. Noticing the two of them, Effie smiled. "There you are." Kai greeted her, and then asked, "Where's Cassie?" The little girl swung her bone, pointing at the flying ship that hovered above the sanctuary. "There. Noctis is, too. Let's go." With that, she swallowed the remains of the bone and raised her hands, as if asking for a hug. Kai sighed, then picked her up and flew into the sky. Sunny grimaced, summoned the heavenly burden, and followed. Soon they landed on the deck of the ship and found Cassie there, already waiting for them. The sorcerer was some distance away, watering the sacred tree. The sight of him with a watering pot in hand was so mundane that it almost looked comical. The members of the cohort approached Noctis and then stopped, waiting respectfully for him to notice them. After a while, Sunny cleared his throat. Some time later, he growled loudly. Finally, the sorcerer flinched, then turned around and smiled. "Oh, you are finally here." Sunny nodded, then asked cautiously, "We are. What did you want to talk about?" Noctis scratched his chin, then sighed. "Well, it's time for the four of you to go and retrieve the ruby knife. It is not too far from here, being kept by a friend of mine. The whole trip should not take you more than a couple of days. Sounds like another disaster." Sunny frowned, hesitated for a second, and then said, "And what exactly do we need to do to get the knife from your friend?" Noctis blinked a couple of times, a confused look on his face. "Oh, nothing? Just go there and tell her to give you the knife, as long as at least one of you is pure in heart and thought she will." "Can't be that easy. And what does being pure even mean?" Sunny wanted to ask a few questions, but then changed his mind. Speaking with Noctis more than absolutely necessary was troublesome. It was also fruitless, since Noctis only ever revealed as much information as he wanted, and never more than that. So, he simply said, "And where does that friend of yours reside?" The immortal transcendent smiled, then conjured a map of the Kingdom of Hope from somewhere, and pointed to a particular island. "Here. See, it's really close." Sunny looked at where the sorcerer's manicured finger pointed, and paled. He knew that island pretty well. It was the island of the tranquil, clear lake that he had been advised to never approach, because the creature living in the lake was so terrifying that even Skytide did not dare to venture there. The creature was surely corrupted, and as for its rank, no one even had a guess. Rattled, he glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and growled, "Are you joking? There's a terrible, unsightly thing living in that lake." The sorcerer looked at him with reproach and then said bitterly, "Well, that unsightly thing is my friend. Shame on you, Sunless. Of all the creatures in the world, I thought that you would be the last to judge someone on their appearance after all. You are a terrible and unsightly thing yourself, and yet we are best friends." Chapter 697. Friendly Visit. Sunny stared at the sorcerer for a few moments, unamused. He really wanted to retort but couldn't. The four-armed demon was indeed a fearsome and unsightly creature, as far as humans were concerned, so denying it would have been a lie. And while the extraordinary rock could repeat his thoughts, the thoughts it spoke aloud still had to be truthful. With an irritated snarl, Sunny looked away and said, "Fine, we will retrieve the ruby knife from your friend that lives in the lake. However, it would only be polite for you to return the favor and give us something in return, don't you think? To avoid putting a strain on our own friendship, you know. These were more or less the exact words Noctis had used to lure him into a confrontation with Nightmare, so Sunny was pretty sure that the sorcerer would not be able to refuse his request. Indeed, the immortal looked at him with a pale smile, and then let out a slightly nervous laugh. "Oh yes, you are right, of course, huh? Is there something particular you have in mind?" Sunny nodded. "As a matter of fact, I do." With that, he pulled an amulet in the form of an anvil from the folds of his kimono and handed it to Noctis. This was the charm Master Wealthy had worn in the Night Temple to protect herself from Mordred. After her death, the small talisman remained in his possession, revealing that it was not a memory, but an actual object. Considering its shape and the fame of the great clan Valor, especially when it came to forging weapons and tools, it was not hard to imagine how the charm came to be. However, that did not mean that Sunny understood how it worked, and he really needed to. Cassie was immune to Mordred's possession due to her blindness, and Sunny himself was protected by the army of shadows contained within his soul. Kai and Effie, however, when he imagined his friends meeting the Prince of Nothing, his blood turned cold. "I want you to make something similar to this." Noctis received that talisman and studied it with a curious smile. Slowly, however, the smile disappeared from his face. His gray eyes glinted with a strange emotion, and he said in a neutral tone, "Where did you get this?" Sunny shrugged. "Off an enemy's corpse." "Well, more or less." "Why?" The sorcerer studied the small anvil for a bit more, and then shook his head with a sigh. "I can't recreate this talisman. The sorcery used to enchant it is not something I have ever seen before. More than that, it was made for a reason that eludes me, and by someone far more powerful than I am, which is a real feat, mind you, considering how mighty and talented I am. In any case, I can't do it. Think of something else." Noctis glanced at the anvil amulet with a frown, and then returned it to Sunny. "Someone far more powerful?" Sunny blinked a couple of times. Had Mordred's father created the talisman to ward off his son personally? Just how dreadful the sovereigns were to impress even an immortal saint of the bygone era. He lingered for a bit, then hid the little anvil and sighed. "All right then. I'll think of something else. We will discuss it after the ruby knife is in our hands." Noctis waved a hand and turned back to the sacred tree, then continued to water it. "Fine, fine. Just don't let your imagination run too wild. I am but a humble sorcerer, you know, not an actual deity. I only look like one. Ah, yes, my heavenly beauty is indeed divine." Sunny sighed, then gestured to the other members of the cohort and turned around. It was time to visit another of the humble sorcerer's friends. 4 awakened were walking across the giant chain that swayed lightly, suspended between 2 skies, one blue and full of light, the other black and devoid of it. Well, to be more precise, only Sunny and Cassie were walking. Kai was levitating above the links of the ancient chain, while Effie was sitting comfortably on Sunny's shoulders. In fact, the little girl was fast asleep and drooling on his head. In other circumstances, Sunny would have been outraged and shaken the fiendish child awake. But right now, he was too preoccupied with grim thoughts. He wasn't even thinking about the creature they were about to face. No, his mind was still on the anvil talisman. Since Noctis was unable to create a second one, someone in their cohort was going to have to remain without any defense against the Prince of Nothing. And now, Sunny had to decide who. Was he going to give the charm to Kai or to Effie? As if reading his thoughts, the little girl suddenly shifted, then yawned and opened her eyes. "Gods, Sunny, stop grinding your fangs so loud, will you? I can't sleep. What has gotten you so tense anyway?" He hesitated for a few moments, then shared his concerns. Both Cassie and Kai listened as well, their faces turning as grim as his own. Effie, however, seemed unconcerned. "What? That's it. How is this a problem? Just give it to Kai, you doofus." Sunny jumped down to the next link, holding Effie's skinny legs to prevent her from falling off, and then asked, "Aren't you afraid of being consumed by Mordred?" The little girl grimaced. "You guys overestimate that Mordred guy a lot. He's not that dangerous." Everyone grew silent. looking at her with doubt. Not dangerous? The 100 lost warriors, 2 ascended knights, and the whole of the northern reach of the Kingdom of Hope begged to differ. She shook her head. What made him dangerous were the 6 cores he possessed, inside the Soul Sea. That guy can mirror the aspect of his enemy, correct? He can use the same abilities, but charge them with the power of multiple cores. Effie snorted. Well, he doesn't have 6 cores anymore. He only has 1, maybe 2 or 3, if he was very diligent and managed to create new ones. Doesn't really matter. Point is, he sacrificed his personal power to create 5 mirror monsters, which made the overall threat he represents far greater, but the danger to one's soul far lesser. She thought for a bit, and then added thoughtfully, in fact, I would even say that what truly makes him dangerous are not his cores, but instead his skill and talent, his genius even, when it comes to combat. The ability to mirror someone's aspect sounds terrifying, but think about it. How long did it take you to get a grasp on how to properly use your abilities? That guy has to fight someone with their own aspect seconds after coming in possession of it, which is not an easy feat. The little girl yawned again, and then settled into a more comfortable position. More than that, he also inherits the person's flaw. So actually, it's just a question of skill and experience. Let him invade my soul sea. I'll teach him some manners. With that, Effie fell asleep once again. Sunny remained silent for a bit, then sighed and handed the anvil amulet to Kai, who received it with a doubtful expression on his face. Effie was not wrong now, that Mordred did not possess an overwhelming advantage in raw power. This facet of his aspect was less dangerous. It all came down to the nature of the victim's abilities and their skill. Effie was far more skilled in combat than Kai was. More than that, her own aspect was all about physical might and melee combat, and he had never seen anyone more comfortable in their physicality than Effie. Even Mordred would find it difficult to utilize her aspect better. But still, looking ahead, he scowled and said, "Let's hope we won't have to find out whether you are right or not. There is still a chance that we will not become enemies with Mordred in this nightmare." Effie shifted slightly, then said in a sleepy voice, "Of course I'm right now. Let me nap in peace." However, instead of doing that, Sunny shook her awake. The little girl sighed with irritation. "What?" He simply pointed forward. "We're here." Just 100 or so meters ahead, the slope of a flying island rose upward from the heavenly chain. They had reached the tranquil lake. Chapter 698, Creature of the Lake. Sunny landed on the very edge of the island and froze there, looking forward with a dark expression on his bestial face. The others remained silent too, feeling his unease and tension. The land in front of them seemed tranquil, beautiful even. There was an expanse of vibrant green grass, and some distance away, it made way for the calm waters of a vast lake. Its surface was perfectly still and reflective, making it seem as though a piece of the blue sky above had somehow gotten embedded into the ground. A gentle wind caressed their faces, and nothing broke the peaceful silence except for the rustle of grass and the distant rattling of chains. And yet, Sunny couldn't help but feel a sense of imminent danger. He sighed, and then glanced at his friends with uncertainty. "Should we summon our armor and weapons?" Kai hesitated for a moment, then said, "Wouldn't that be seen as a sign of distrust and hostility? Pure heart, pure thoughts, whatever that means, does not seem to fit with being armed and ready for a fight." Sunny grimaced. "Yeah, however, what if we do have to fight?" Effie smiled. "The 4 of us should be able to at least retreat safely. Should things go wrong. I mean, how terrible can that thing be?" Sunny shivered, then shook his head. "Terrible enough for saints to fear it. I've been to this island a few times in the future, but stuck to the edges, never approaching the lake, so I don't actually know what kind of a creature lives in its depths. However, I did see bones laying on the shore, and just those bones alone looked like they had belonged to things I would not want to meet." He hesitated for a while, then glanced at Cassie. "What do you think?" The young woman tilted her head a little, then said calmly, "I don't feel any danger. Maybe Noctis was honest this time." Sunny sighed. Cassie's intuition had guided each of them through countless dangers unscathed. If she felt that it was safe, there was a good reason to listen. That didn't mean that he had to be happy about it, though. All right, no weapons or armor for now, just pure thoughts. Together they crossed the stretch of land between the edge of the island and the shore of the lake, stopping just a few steps away from the calm water. Because of how still and reflective it was, no one could peer beneath the surface. However, Sunny could feel something deep beneath the water. A vast and sprawling shadow, ancient, deep, unfathomable. He shivered. Sunny lingered for a bit, then cleared his throat and, feeling extremely stupid, addressed the lake. I am here to retrieve the ruby knife. Please give it to me." There was a gust of wind, and nothing happened. Is it because of Harper? Or all the things I've done to survive in the outskirts? A few moments later, Effie laughed. "Oh, I guess you are not pure, Sunny. Who would have thought?" He gritted his teeth, then growled at her angrily. "Go and try yourself, then." The little girl shook her head vigorously. No, no, no. One has ever accused me of being pure, I think. Although, she thought for a bit and then shrugged. I guess I am in the body of a child. The girl climbed down from Sunny's shoulders, approached the water, and stretched out a hand. "Can I please have the knife, Auntie from the lake?" Once again, nothing happened. Effie remained there for a few moments, then sighed and took a step back. Figures. Finally, both of them turned and stared at Kai. The young man hesitated for a few moments, then shook his head. "I think Cassie should try." Sunny and Effie glanced at each other, a little surprised, then shrugged and made way for the blind girl to approach the water. There was no harm in trying anyway. Cassie lingered for a few moments, then sighed and walked toward the shore. Stopping mere centimeters from the calm water, she lowered her head and said simply, "I am here for the ruby knife." At first, Sunny thought that she had failed as well. But then, the young woman suddenly paled and took a step back. There was a ripple on the surface of the lake, and although the vast shadow hidden within it did not move, something suddenly appeared from beneath the water. A pale white hand that held a long knife, which seemed to be made of solidified blood. The hand rose from the water and offered it to Cassie, who suddenly trembled with her whole body and took another step back, shaking her head with a panicked look. Then, however, she stopped. Her bloodless lips turned into a straight line, and gritting her teeth, the young woman returned to the shore. There she knelt and leaned forward, taking the ruby knife from the deathly white hand. The hand let go of it easily and disappeared back into the water, and soon, nothing but a slowly dissipating ripple remained to remind them of its existence. Sunny observed all of this in shock. It didn't move, the shadow did not even move. He was about to say something. But then, the water rippled again, and another hand emerged, this one black as coal and holding nothing. It slowly moved toward Cassie, then rose, and softly caressed her cheek. The young woman flinched when the black flesh touched her, but remained in place. A few seconds later, the black hand retreated back into the lake as well. Cassie only moved when the ripples were gone, standing up and turning to them with a distant expression on her beautiful face. In the spot where the black hand touched her cheek, her skin turned gray and opened, drops of blood rolling down her chin. She was holding the ruby knife in her trembling hands. Sunny finally found himself able to speak. What the hell was that?" Cassie remained motionless for a while, then suddenly shivered. I don't know. Let's just get out of here. Please." He frowned but did not object. To tell the truth, Sunny couldn't wait to get away from the lake himself. As they were walking away, he briefly turned and looked at the tranquil water one last time. Was it an illusion, or did the reflection of the sky on its surface seem darker? As they were walking back across the chains, he looked at Kai and asked, a bit of curiosity finding its way into his voice, "How did you know that it will give the knife to Cassie?" The blind girl turned her head slightly, as if equally interested to hear the answer. Even Effie seemed stumped. The young man glanced at them and shrugged, smiling beneath his wooden mask. Pure heart, pure thoughts, all of us wondered what that means, right? Well, I think we all made a mistake, because it didn't really matter how we understood it. The only thing that mattered was how Noctis had understood it, centuries ago, when he entrusted the knife to the creature. He grew silent for a bit, and then added, he gave the ruby knife away after finding out that Hope was driving the chain lords mad, fearing what he might do with it should the worst happen. So, to him, purity of heart and thought meant something very specific, the ability to remain of clear mind, true to his oath, and loyal to his sacred duty. And while none of us is perfect, Cassie is the most clear-headed and dutiful person I know. Sonny tilted his head, not sure if he agreed with that statement. The creature of the lake had, though, which meant that Kai was at least partially right. Or it had all been just a coincidence. As he was remembering the past with a dark expression on his face, the young man suddenly spoke again, his voice hoarse and somber. That was why Noctis had sent us to retrieve the knife instead of coming himself, I guess, because he has gone mad, betrayed his oath, and abandoned his duty. And we are helping him walk even further on that path. Walk further into the madness until he reaches its end. Chapter 699, Reverse Scale. The journey back was, sadly, uneventful. Sonny had hoped that they would stumble upon a few nightmare creatures, but this close to the sanctuary, there weren't many, except for those too powerful for the cohort to attack without a serious reason and thorough preparations. Come to think of it, these powerful abominations were probably the reason why the weaker ones kept away. Perhaps that was why Noctis had not eradicated them. Well, that, or he was simply too lazy. They returned to the sorcerer's stronghold at dawn, and went to find him without wasting any time. However, Noctis was not at his residence, and the wooden door remained shut. Eventually they located him at the far side of the island, where the immortal was making a statue. There were several giant slabs of marble laying on the ground, and a dozen or so chisels hacking at them without anyone's help. The sorcerer stood some distance away, his luscious black hair powdered by marble dust, and watched it all with a satisfied expression on his face while sipping from a glass of wine. The first of the statues seemed to be close to completion and resembled something. It might have been a human or a horse. Sonny found it hard to tell. Noticing them, Noctis grinned. "Oh, you're back." Then he looked at the hideous stone abomination and raised his chin proudly. "What do you think? Majestic, right?" Sonny hesitated for a few moments and then said cautiously, that is one word to describe it without a doubt. But what is it?" The sorcerer frowned with confusion. "What do you mean?" "It's me. A monument to me, that is. I have decided to grace the generations to come with a vision of my matchless beauty. They deserve the privilege of witnessing it as well. Who am I to devoid people of such blessing?" He glanced at the terrifying marble monster, scratched the back of his head, and added, "Of course, I might have failed to grasp a couple of nuances of the sculpting art just yet. This one is really not too bad, but it is just the first attempt. Luckily, I have plenty of these slabs to practice. 7 should be enough to reach perfection. Well, maybe 14 or 20. Sonny stared at the hideous statue for a bit, quite sure that it looked more like a monstrous gargoyle than Noctis. Then he shook his head and said, "Good for you. Meanwhile, we have retrieved the ruby knife. So what comes next?" The sorcerer remained silent for a while, then sighed despondently. "I guess it's time to take a break. Come, let's have something to eat and drink, of course, and discuss the future. Now that the knives are in our possession, the future will surely be upon us soon enough." Sometime later, they were enjoying a light breakfast in the shade of the ancient tree that grew in the heart of the sanctuary. Noctis poured himself some wine, then offered them a polite smile. "You must be curious about what happens next." The 4 of them glanced at each other, then nodded. The sorcerer shrugged. "Well, to be honest, nothing much. By now the other chain lords already know that I am collecting the knives. The death of the one in the north would have distracted them for a bit, but at the same time, it would have made my actions look much more suspicious. So, they will hold a council and decide how to act." He took a sip of wine and smiled. However, getting Sylvain and Severus into one room is not an easy task. It will take them some time to come together. After that, predictably, they will send a herald to give me some sort of an ultimatum, and only then, after their polite request is denied, will they act, joining forces to invade my lands, capture me, and make me bitterly regret the fact I am immortal." Noctis shook his head, then laughed. Sunny, on the other hand, shivered and asked, his voice full of tension, "Is this really something to laugh about? How are we going to repel an attack of 3 transcendents?" The sorcerer grew silent, then shook his head. "Ah, well, simple, really. We won't." He took another sip of wine and looked up, at the flying ship that hovered above them. "Instead, we will attack them first. We will lay siege to the Ivory City." Noticing their stunned gazes, Noctis laughed again. "Ah, children, you are so fun to talk to. These expressions are priceless. However, even younglings like you should have learned by now that having more power doesn't always mean achieving victory. The 3 lords that oppose us are very powerful indeed, but they are not without weaknesses." He paused, and then looked at them, his eyes glinting with a hint of moonlight. "To tell you the truth, neither Solvain nor the Sun Prince concern me that much. The only one worth being scared of, the only one who can defeat me, is Severus, the Ivory Lord, that dreadful dragon, because between all 7 of the Chain Lords, only he and I belong to divine bloodlines. Only the 2 of us trace our lineage to gods." Sunny frowned. "Wait, aren't Severus and the Sun Prince brothers? How come he is the only one with a divine lineage?" Noctis shrugged. "All kinds of strange things happen when it comes to gods. Who knows? In any case, he is the only brother who inherited the fire, and he is formidable for it, beyond words. So we won't be able to defeat Severus unless we strike at his flaw." Sunny froze. "You know his flaw?" The sorcerer smiled gingerly, then chuckled. "Of course, we immortals spent more than 1,000 years bound together. I know all of their flaws and they know mine. But Severus, that guy, is rather special. In a sense, he actually has 3. Noctis grew silent for a few moments, taking a sip from his glass. Then he sighed and said with a hint of sadness, "One is his actual flaw, the other is his brother, and the last one, the direst of them all, is his city." He looked at the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, his face turning cold and ruthless. "By using all 3, we will destroy him." Chapter 700. Blood of the Moon. No one dared to speak for a few moments, unnerved by the sudden change in the sorcerer's mood. After a while, though, Effie tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Care to elaborate, Grandpa Noctis?" Noctis looked at her absent-mindedly, then flinched and jerked his sleeve away, wiping the spot where the little girl touched it with a repulsed look. "Gee, Grandpa? Who are you calling a grandpa, you critter?" He moved his chair away from Effie and stared at her menacingly for a moment, then threw a hurt look at Sunny. Sunny shrugged. "You are 1,000 years older than her." The sorcerer opened his mouth with a deeply offended expression, then puffed and looked away. After a long and poignant pause, he continued, "Anyway, as I was saying, Severus has 3 weaknesses. The first one is his flaw. He is incredibly powerful during the day, but nearly powerless during the night. The second one is his brother surprising. I know, considering what he did to the poor guy, but the Ivory Lord still genuinely cares about his younger sibling. In fact, that is probably the only thing he cares about anymore, apart from his duty and principles." Noctis grew quiet for a moment, and then added in a somber tone, "And the third one is his city. That Severus loves his people, but he also hates them. They are a burden that weighs heavily on his soul, one that he cannot escape. Their relationship had long been perverted by hope and by his own stubborn unwillingness to give up. Noble, righteous Severus, he might seem like the sanest among us, but in reality, he is the closest to utter madness. All it will take to send him over the edge is one push." The immortal transcendent sighed, then shook his head reproachfully. "That guy, truly, he has always been too serious. You can't survive in this place without a sense of humor, even if you are immortal." The sorcerer giggled at his own joke, and then looked at them with a relaxed smile. "So we will attack at night, when the ivory dragon Severax is at his weakest, and we will kill his younger brother before dawn. That will be the push that sends him into the abyss and dooms him." Sunny shivered, looked at the immortal transcendent, and asked cautiously, "Is it wise to drive a dragon insane?" Hearing this, Noctis simply laughed. Of course, Severus the Ivory Lord is fearsome and dreadful, but Severax the dragon is just a mindless beast. Killing a beast is not too difficult for a cunning hunter. And while I might not be as righteous and as noble as Severus, his smile disappeared and his eyes suddenly shone with pale light. I am blood of the moon, beast god, the god of hunters. With that, the sorcerer leaned back and took a sip of his wine, slowly returning to his usual carefree self. Granted, I have not hunted for a while. The wilderness is just so ghastly, you know. The dirt, the insects, the fashion. Oh, the horror. He sighed heavily and then smiled again. Sonny hesitated for a bit. There was a question that he really wanted to ask, but was not sure that he should. Finally, he said, "What is your flaw, then? I know that it is not the kind of question people ask or answer, but our lives will be depending on your fight with the dragon. I think we have the right to know." Noctis waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, it's nothing much. More or less the exact opposite of his. I am at my strongest under the moonlight, but grow weak in the sunlight. No reason to hide it from friends." He thought for a bit, and then added, "Solvain's flaw is perhaps the most cruel. She is cursed with beguiling beauty. Being with her slowly drives people mad with longing and lust, like an insidious drug. The more someone spends time with her, the more they want to possess her, eventually giving in to irresistible desire. A terrible fate, no doubt, but not exactly something we can use. Unless, of course, one of you... No. Let's not think about that." Noctis grinned, then shook his head. The Sun Prince's flaw, well, it doesn't matter anymore. Now that he is encased in that steel monstrosity and almost mindless, we won't be able to make use of it anyway. We will just have to kill him in a straightforward manner. So do you guys have questions? The four of them looked at each other, and after a long pause, Kai asked hoarsely, "Yes, Lord Noctis, just one. When we attack the Ivory City at night, and you are fighting the Sun Prince and Solvain, what, exactly, are we four supposed to do?" The sorcerer stared at them in confusion, then raised an eyebrow. "Why is it not clear? While I am preoccupied with the Chain Lords, you will simply have to destroy the Sun Legion and the army of the Red Colosseum." He thought for a bit, and then added, "Well, if you somehow fail to destroy them, at least keep them away from me for a while. Solvain and the Sun Prince, yeah, shouldn't take me too long. I think you will manage." At the precipice of night, Sunny came to the edge of the island alone and stood there for a while, shrouded in shadows. Now that things were nearing the final stage, there was a lot he had to think about. There was the seemingly insane plan of attacking the Ivory City, the battle the cohort was going to wage against two armies while saints fought in the skies above them. And then there was Mordred, who remained an unknown variable in this whole mess. What concerned him the most, however, was his unformed fourth core. Going into the dire battle as a devil would have been far better. What's more, he couldn't allow himself to undergo the debilitating process of forming a new core in the midst of the furious clash. With the culmination of the nightmare swiftly approaching, he had no more time left to slowly seek out and kill nightmare creatures. And so, Sunny was forced to do something that he had always been reluctant to do. With a sigh, he summoned his shadows. The taciturn knight, the Stygian steed, and the tenebrous serpent appeared in front of him, their figures drowning in the darkness. Two of his shadows slid forward and wrapped themselves around Nightmare and the Soul Serpent, with only the gloomy one remaining at his feet. Sunny lingered for a bit, and then said, "Go, travel far and wide, seek out nightmare creatures, and kill them. I need you to hunt for me, instead of with me, for a while." He paused, and then added somberly, "Be careful, however, this world is a dangerous place. No matter how strong you are, how powerful you are, there is always someone, or something, far stronger. Especially when you are alone. So don't let yourself get destroyed, all right?" Saint stared at him for a few moments, then outstretched a hand. After he placed the hilt of the scarlet odachi in it, she silently turned around and jumped down, landing on the links of the heavenly chain far below. Nightmare and the Soul Serpent dashed in opposite directions, soon disappearing from view. Just like that, Sonny was left alone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then sighed and looked down at the gloomy shadow. I guess it's just you and me again. Like good old times, huh? The shadow stared at him darkly for a second, and then raised a hand, clearly unsure what good times he was talking about exactly. Sonny smiled. Yeah, love you too, buddy.